Why is this show always so goddamn loud?
Hello, and welcome to a special edition of The David Frum Show. I'm David Frum, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
Okay, good.
Early this morning, January...
Okay, 56. God, let's see how far we can get.
Dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife...
Not enough space. Never enough goddamn space.
It's an extraordinary moment, and rather than wait any longer, I thought it would be helpful and useful to viewers and listeners if I invited a journalist,
okay.
opposition Well and Applebaum, to share her thoughts with me about what this moment means and what's to come.
Delighted to join you.
Let's talk about our concerns and our worries and our hopes. The Maduro regime is desperately unpopular in Venezuela.
True.
It staged a sham election in 2024, which it lost, even
though
the apparatus of the election. There is a legitimate, recognized by the United States president of Venezuela. But Donald Trump seems to have something more militaristic and imperial in mind, at least according.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, okay, I'll talk about this afterwards. I'll mention this thing afterwards.
He said America is going to run Venezuela.
Well, that's it.
What that can mean, given that we don't have an embassy in Caracas right now, we don't have U.S. troops in Caracas right now. Not clear to me how we would run Venezuela.
True.
Maybe it means that we would hand over to the existing regime, which is, of course, what the Venezuelan opposition has been afraid of. Maybe it means that the opposition will be allowed to come back, but by what process that would happen and how
600.5 combat items.
Pretty unclear and pretty
guns and shit.
I mean, I should say there, as you said, there was an election in 2024. The leader of the opposition, which is Maria Corina Machado, who's recently won the Nobel Peace Prize, was not allowed to run.
Actually, you know what? 50 days. That goes quick. That's gonna go a lot quicker than I think I'm like properly aware of, if I'm honest.
The Venezuelans staged this really incredible operation whereby they had people in all the polling stations, or in many of the polling stations across the country, and they collected the original vote tallies. They proved that Gonzalez was the victor. The Venezuelan courts and the Venezuelan regime, which were controlled by Maduro, refused to let him take power. And not only that, they really and truly violently repressed people who were his advocates and people who've been working for him. So this is a country that will not be.
What do I need? I need duct tape.
See Maduro go, but is very, very nervous about what might come next.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was struck by at the press conference
was
the nationalist bragging by American leaders that this is a thing they did for the United States, not for the Venezuelans. The United States, of course, acted entirely alone without any regional.
Sentinel Falcon. I can do 3 more of those fucking things.
National legitimacy, without any action of Congress. There is an indictment by an American court of Nicolas Maduro. So they're trying to say this is like what happened in Panama in 1990 with Manuel Noriega, where U.S. troops enforced a court order. But again, the ambitions here are much.
Okay. Shield.
And without regard to the Venezuelan people themselves. And one thing that I think is
ammo and
maybe
usables.
The administration wants to rule Venezuela, or at least wants to control who does rule. At the same time, millions of Venezuelans have sought refuge outside. The States is treating them like enemies, in a sense, is detaining them, expelling them, sending some of them to torture prisons. Maybe this is the way that they reconcile those two imperatives by saying, okay, now there's a dictator we like in charge in Venezuela, and we can now round up everyone who fled the last dictator.
I mean, that's
STELLA, MONTIS, consumables, adrenaline. Do I really want to take a key? Do I care about a key? I don't care enough about a key, so fuck the key. What I do want to take are bullets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. And 1, 2, 3, 4. No, 4. Thank you. Perfect. Back. Play. STELLA, MONTIS. And as is always the thing with this game, the moment you spend any amount of time, and I mean any amount of time, organizing your layout, you will get killed within the first 30 seconds. Fact. Right. So, yeah, okay. Oh, actually, before we do that, upgrade. 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 I need more metal parts. You know what? I can make them. Inventory. Aisle items. Where are they? Alloys. I need alloys. 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 Alloys.
So it's
alloy. Recycle.
Firm. Or a military action.
Firm.
Calling it, that has been
damn it.
designed
Cancel.
for
Upgrades.
domestic purposes.
Upgrade.
This is for U.S. domestic political consumption rather than.
Okay, cool. Screw it. Let's jump in.
I noticed that, and speaking of the U.S.
Right, still at MONTIS on a Saturday night. What are the actual chances I get slaughtered within the first 5 minutes? Especially if you're not using a free loadout.
It's as if he says, I'm accounting only to my half or my 40% of American opinion, or these days maybe 38%. I'm not accepting any responsibility to the whole country, and certainly not.
It doesn't matter. I mean, the goal right now is basically just to get as many materials as I possibly can to stuff in the goddamn exhibition thing for next month. That's the only reason I'm here. We're not here to make fancy weapons. We're not here to do any of that. It's just grind, grind, grind. Like a coffee grinder. Just that. That's my job right now. Just grind, 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 grind. Hello, CJ in chat. How are you? Hi, back at you. Okay, here we go.
Rights to work and so on in a way the United States has not done. If there had been some kind of international coalition, and if there were a clear plan to restore the democracy that Venezuela enjoyed from the 1950s until the 1990s.
Yeah, no, there could be more. And
screw you. Where are you?
I mean, and one of maybe the strangest thing about this whole thing is the administration.
Okay, what we got here? Magnet, nice. Magnet, surprisingly useful.
I don't even know what to call it. Is it an invasion? Is it a military event? I mean, in
Fuck you.
They made.
We could call it a special military operation.
That came to my head, but I was thinking, no, I think I'm going to not go there. Just.
Oh shit.
The failure to justify it to the.
How did I miss?
The failure to sell it, the failure to explain it, the multiple explanations for it that have been offered, none of which are quite satisfying or seem quite true. You know, the kind of belated adding on of the.
Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?
Oil was stolen from America.
There you are.
Again,
I don't know what. Fuck. Ah!
Whether it's even true. And then you're right. I mean, I would say that not only has he appeared, not only has President Trump
there we go.
And on his own social media, he also apparently, and we'll have to find out whether this is really the case in the
Yeah.
apparently has only spoken to, or his administration has only spoken to Republican members of Congress and of the Senate. So rather than creating a bipartisan congressional agreement to do this, he simply appealed.
Someone out there's making some beautiful music. Hey there, how are you? Yeah, bro. You sing beautiful music, bro.
We are at a kind of breakthrough moment. I mean, it is a different kind.
How much you want to bet this asshole tries to kill me?
U.S. military operation. I mean, U.S. has invaded other countries before. You can argue U.S. has broken international law before, but to do.
He's gonna do it. I can tell he's gonna do it.
Without any explanation, without any support in Congress or any attempt to get it, without looking for any.
Last time I did this, I got super up close to something and I was searching it, and the guy was doing exactly that. I mean, right next to me. And as soon as I started to like search, I don't know if he knew the timing or some shit, he immediately was just like, boom, you're dead. So we ain't doing that this time.
Arguments about supposed.
Yeah, they're fucking following me.
Terrorists or immigrants whom he's fighting against, maybe to give him the opportunity.
I don't trust these guys. I don't trust these guys for 1 minute. So we're moving downstairs.
But it looks more like,
bye, bros.
As you said at the beginning, a kind of nationalist, moment to describe America's armed forces and how great they are, rather than something that was designed.
He's fucking been a cheeky. He's been a slippery bastard.
And I say that as somebody who's, as I've been writing for years about how tragic the story of Venezuela is, and how much damage.
You following me, bro? What's the deal?
Did to Venezuela, and how impressive the Venezuelan opposition is, and how it's worked.
Right. Chemicals.
So I really wish the best for them, and I am.
We're going here. I mean, I'm too late in, so I'm not going to find anything worthwhile.
The reason I went there on the phrase special military operation, which is the term, of course, that Vladimir Putin uses to describe the Russian aggression in Ukraine,
is that me?
Is that there does seem to be a whiff of a deal that Donald Trump has in mind with the Russians, and maybe with the Chinese too, to say, You know how the United States historically rejected spheres of influence?
What's that, sorry?
Russia, you can have Ukraine, and I will help you get it. And I will backstab Europeans who try
What the
to
fuck are they, guys? What are they doing? Who are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing?
China, I'm not going to meaningfully resist your operation.
They're moving as a team.
I'm not even that serious about protecting Taiwan. In return, I want your
Okay, that's interesting.
your client in Venezuela, because the relationship between Maduro and Russia was close. The
I don't trust these guys for one goddamn second.
We have aggression in mind against Panama, against Greenland, and maybe also Canada.
Oh, duct tape.
We will be the empire of the Western Hemisphere. You guys take your sections, and we will each be masters of our own domain without regard for concepts of democracy or self-determination or meaningful alliances or mutual respect of nations.
So that idea that the world is going to be split into 3 spheres of influence has been kicking around for a while. And so I first started hearing it a couple of years ago as an idea kind of bubbling up and moving around in the, in right-wing media. And I have heard a couple of people who were close or claimed to be close to the Trump administration talk about it in the last year. And of course, it's terribly dangerous. It's dangerous for the United States because of the kind of backlash that it may create in Latin America and Europe and elsewhere. It's dangerous for America's trading partners and allies around the world. It's incredibly dangerous for Europe, which then somehow becomes open to Russian manipulation and maybe Russian invasion. And of course, it's very dangerous.
Sometimes you get lucky and you find a blueprint in these. Just throwing that out there.
The Philippines and others. And it really creates the prospect for
Yeah, you get anvils, yeah.
reordered world, one in which violence becomes much more common and the use of military power by big countries against smaller ones becomes normalized. And that, of course, will have economic effects and will eventually be felt by all Americans. I mean, because America's
Okay, this is all being read already.
power and America's success
Yep, all read it already.
several decades, I mean, certainly since the Second World War, have been based on a very
Light bulbs are sometimes useful. Drop
at
those.
least a part of the Trump administration is ready to give up that idea.
Let me go through that. That's such an important point, especially the point about how you make violence more acceptable and more common. Let me just go through something for people who don't think about this as much as you do. Why Americans have, at least since 1945 and really longer than that, rejected
no.
spheres of influence. Because it may seem logical to some people. Well, China has its backyard, Russia has its backyard. Why can't the United States have its backyard? And everybody
Drop that. Useless. But got so many of those, it's unreal.
First was American said,
Yeah, if you're gonna go for the bastion, aim for the yellow joints.
when we call for free trade, when we call for democracy and human rights, we're not doing that to assert American dominance over others. We're using the extraordinary advantages of the United States, the security, the natural resources, the wealth.
That's true.
To deliver something to other people that all human beings want. Not all human beings should want, all human beings do want. They all want to.
Apparently you need a teapot for something. I don't need oil,
So we're going to speak
chemicals.
for all. The United States has no means, but the ends are not American. The ends are universal. So we're going to speak for that. And then, what's our spirit? The answer is the whole. Nuclear practice. Our idea is ultimately all human. We want cooperation. Because we're not trying to take the spirit. It's our it's always our we want some carbon from human rights and freedom and democracy and international mutual commerce. We're not going to give it to them. It's most surprising. It's a doctrine of American weakness. The United States is more complicated than Europe, much less Ukraine. On those. We want to take free preservation. So we're just going to retreat. And because that makes the American right much less attractive, there's going to be more within the United States and now Venezuela.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's America giving
Nicely done, guys. Well done.
on relationships with the world, and America retreating into a kind of 19th century idea of we dominate our neighbors and we don't have anything with anything else. It means that America's global companies will suddenly discover that the rules that were very often created to help them and help them succeed in Asia or in Europe will change, and they'll be less successful. It means that things that Americans took for granted, the ability to travel or the ability to do business in different parts of the world, maybe even the dominance of the American dollar that was accepted by people as a kind of quid pro quo in exchange for the pocket money. All those things will begin to fall away.
Fuck was that?
And they will make Americans poor. I mean, I think every American will feel it. Americans will feel it economically. They'll feel it politically. They'll feel it in terms of how they are defined.
Well, that was a grenade, so.
So the United States will no longer see itself as a beacon of democracy or as
Okay, well, I guess heal up and extract if you've got everything you want.
As an ordinary neighborhood bully. And I think that will affect the way Americans perceive their own country as well. And I think it will have an echo in domestic politics. I've seen this happen in other countries, when the nature of the country changes, when the role it plays in the world becomes different, that affects people. I think Americans have grown used to the idea that we were a good power in the world, or we tried to be, and we didn't always succeed, but we had some ideals. There were things we stood for. Okay. There was international law. There were international institutions that we backed. And once we don't do that anymore, I think Americans will feel differently about their country. And I really do believe it's.
I'm not sure about that, truth be told.
Everybody.
This is not a hypothetical point. This is a point rooted in American history. If you lived in the United States 100 years ago, 1926, over much of the country was fastened a system of laws that bear a lot of resemblance to what the Nazis imposed on German Jews at Nuremberg. Over maybe a third or a quarter of the country, there were all kinds.
Ooh, bad luck for someone.
Not just in the old Deep South, but in other places too. There were restrictions imposed by race on where you could travel, how you could travel, what facilities you could use, who could marry whom. That was in the Deep South too. It was the need to defend democracy first against Nazi Germany, or to defend American interests first against Nazi Germany, and then against the Soviet Union, that transformed a lot of what Americans regarded as acceptable at home. That the country had to be a democracy at home if it were to defend democracy abroad. And the classic statement of this, I refer people, if they have a chance to look at it, to watch or to read President Kennedy's civil rights speech in 1962, when he made this explicit. He said, how can we defend freedom in Berlin if we don't have freedom in Alabama? And so the United States, to win the Cold War, became a more perfect democracy at home. If the United States gives up on that, the way is set to unravel all those changes that happened comparatively recently, between the 1930s and the 1960s.
There's another example of that as well, which is that in the arguments that were made for desegregation of schools in the United States, in the Supreme Court arguments that were made, the American Justice Department specifically made a reference to the U.S. presenting itself abroad. How can we argue for democracy abroad if we aren't willing to have desegregated schools, here in the United States? So, starting in about the 1940s and 1950s, you're absolutely right that the idea of what America stood for abroad, again, theoretically, it wasn't always true in practice, and what America should be at home, again, theoretically, not always in practice, that those ideas came together. And as they split apart, as the United States becomes something different abroad, you're right that we may find ourselves becoming a different country at home, or certainly the constituency, the people who want us to return to an older way of running the country and older ideas about race and hierarchy. You'll see them saying, well, since we don't have to play this role in the world anymore, why shouldn't we? What do we need civil rights legislation for now?
Let me ask you, just to go back to the point about special military operation. One of the big mysteries about Trump has always been, what's the special sauce? What's the hold that Putin has?
Okay, back in.
I think his business links to Russia go back a long way.
Grinding STELLA MONTIS. For those who are watching, that's the job today. That's the goal. In, out, in, out. Getting as much stuff as we possibly can. I said it before, I'll say it again. Coffee grinder. Just grinding away. Grinding away.
And some of the Venezuelan opposition are saying this. Again, there's no proof, so I have to be careful.
All right, let's get back in there.
Kind of deal over Maduro was done. That he was given up. That he was handed over. Maybe that was done by people who did it in exchange for hoping that they would stay in charge.
Fucking craziness.
Other members of the regime would take
Okay,
over.
where are we?
Maybe it was done with
Medical research. Oh, we're 5 minutes late. Shit.
But the links between Trump and Putin and between Trump and Russia go well beyond Venezuela.
Well, that point about what the Venezuelan opposition fears brings me to maybe this closing segment of our dialogue today, which is my concern about the way some of the Democratic opposition, capital D, in the United States has been talking about this. That you are hearing from some very outspoken people who say it's wrong for the United States ever to help to overthrow a dictator.
I'm not going to shoot. Don't worry.
Whatever government a country has, that's its business. And however much the vast majority of that country's people hate that government and fear it, however cruel and authoritarian and even aggressive it is, because the Maduro regime has committed aggressions against neighbors, Brazil, Guyana, and Colombia too, that it's none of our business and we should leave it alone. And I think in reaction to Trump's militarism and imperialism, we're getting a kind of small, an isolation.
Someone's going for the bastion already, huh?
Very dangerous. I wish I heard more Democrats saying, if this were
Motherfuck!
restoring the legitimate winner of the 2024 election, if it were waged in with backing from Congress and with support from Venezuela's neighbors, then yeah, helping to bring...
Congratulations, you got a free loadout. Well done. Kill that fucking rat. Oh, that's what you get, bitch. That's what you get.
Similar kind of chauvinism that we're hearing from. That this is none of our business. We have no concern.
Listen, guys, I'm about to die. I've got fuck all, but you're welcome to it. But if you have a defib, I'd appreciate it.
Not over Venezuela, but in Venezuela.
I know I don't have one now, but that's what I was saying, you. When I die, you're welcome to my stuff. I mean, but fuck, I'm burning. No, hey, the rat's dead. The rat's dead. Don't worry.
Which we might easily have.
Okay, no worries. Right, you're welcome to my stuff.
I think there were people who wanted to do that. Then we would also be affecting the outcome of politics in Venezuela.
Right, fuck it. I'm out.
We live by ourselves, in a bubble, and we don't influence anybody else is also wrong. I mean, I do have to say that given how little Trump involved the Democrats and how
right back in there again.
Effort is even
Reload out.
To reach out to people and explain what he's doing and justify it, and how half-hearted it is. I mean, I found his press conference very half-hearted, and he seemed kind of unenthusiastic, and it wasn't. People were sort of repeating themselves and saying things by rote. How great our soldiers are and what a marvelous thing this was, and given that, it's not really surprising that people have reacted this way. It's also, to say, well, it would be great if we had done this on behalf of democracy in Venezuela, feels a bit empty, given that obviously Trump wasn't going to do that because he doesn't care about democracy anywhere. So I have some sympathy with people who are very critical.
Are we in? What time are we at? Oh shit, early.
It is important to keep remembering
Loading bay, seed vault, shit.
And how delighted people are, across the continent that Maduro is gone, and to just keep that in mind as a factor going forward.
This is a more marker for the future. I mean, obviously it's true, as you say, Trump didn't do this for democracy. Indeed, and he didn't do it to stop the drug flow either. Maduro is right now an alleged and indicted drug trafficking president, but there was a convicted drug trafficking president in an American prison, and he was released at the end of November, pardoned at the end of November. I guess they announced the pardon at the end of November and made it legal at the beginning of December. In exchange for what? One can only speculate, but I don't think it's just for a Christmas card that Trump would let somebody like that.
No, this was the former president of Honduras. Yeah, I mean, there's hypocrisy all over this. As I said, the conversations with Maduro about oil that took place last year, the letting go other drug kingpins, the question of whether Venezuelans were really important to the United States anyway.
They're sending the Venezuelan drug traffic with cocaine, which was on its way to Europe. And by the way, blowing up boats is judging by market prices. The Wall Street Journal reported, I think in the fall, that the retail price of cocaine in the United States over the first year of the Trump administration was down, if I remember this right, something like 25%. The one price he successfully brought down was the price of cocaine. That's the drug that's flowing via Venezuela. So obviously, blowing up boats doesn't work.
No. I mean, when you look at any of his reasons, they all, they kind of shrink on touching them. I mean, and this is why we're all looking for other kinds of explanations. Is there a secret oil deal? Is there a secret deal with Putin? Is there some deeper plan to spread this form of conquest across the Americas? Because the reasons as stated just don't make any sense. They don't add up. They don't have a strategy. They aren't a plan. They're not a plan. They're certainly not a plan for Venezuela, but they also don't really make sense in the United States. It's not about increasing American prosperity or safety, or America's good name in the world. And I think that's what's perplexing people and causing this really angry reaction. I agree that there's an aspect of it that's maybe small-minded, but I emphasize it too.
Well, I disagree. Parts of Trump won most of that violate Trump's protections. And I worry that it would be a bad result of part of Trump 2 that continued is this spreading to both parties of American nationalism and disregard for, as you say, the hope and faith of the Venezuelan people in a different America, the America they remember and still believe in, which is a country that would say, look, we're not going around the world starting wars, we're not intervening promiscuously, but how other people do matters to us. There are, especially in this hemisphere, but everywhere, but especially in this hemisphere. And if the United States, in conjunction with law and partners, can restore a democracy that was stolen and support people who have, as you say, courageously acted to defend and maintain and reassert.
There's a rat out there somewhere.
That's not none of our business.
There's a rat.
It's part of the common business of humanity.
I agree, and that the United States aspired to be a beacon and aspired to be a country that wanted to make itself better and make the world better was, I think, one of the things that gave Americans a lot of pride and a lot of satisfaction, and it would be, I think, tragic for us to lose.
As we're talking, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has apparently added a threat to Cuba to the list of reasons that the United States supposedly acted in Venezuela. Do you have any thoughts about how to make sense of that threat?
So people should understand that there's a huge relationship between the Venezuelan regime and the Cuban regime. So much so, I was talking to a Mexican journalist who told me he'd been to Venezuela not that long ago. He was very struck by the fact that all the people around Maduro were all Cuban. So a lot of his security guard was Cuban, and a lot of the people who were protecting him were Cuban. The Cubans were supplying security help and advice to the Venezuelans and have been a really important part of keeping the regime in power, especially as it became more and more unpopular. Cuba also gets oil from Venezuela and has a kind of symbiotic trade relationship with Venezuela, and so it may be that Rubio hopes that the fall of Maduro will change the regime in Venezuela will eventually.
Fuck you.
So we may be hoping for that, as a possible consequence.
Damn it.
Some of those theories have a way of proving.
Well, free loadout. Who cares?
Or dangerous or wrong, and so for Rubio to hope that by changing the government of Venezuela, he will somehow affect the government of Cuba. There's a long history of those kinds of theories being wrong. But it's perfectly possible that that was one of the things in his head when he pushed for this operation, as we know he did.
Seems unlikely that President Trump was thinking about
Seems
that.
very unlikely that President Trump cares one way or the other about Cuba. I agree.
And thank you for taking time today.
Thanks for devoting the time yourself.
And we're going to resume normal scheduling with the program releasing on Wednesday. Thank you all for watching the David Frum Show. Remember, the best way to work with this program and a band of myself is to subscribe to The Atlantic. I hope you'll
in Venezuela and basically been entirely explicit about two things. One, that this is at least partly about oil and about the United States wanting oil interests in Venezuela. And also, and this is another gobsmacking thing about the entire thing when you think about Donald Trump's personal history, which is a candidate, a politician who basically probably couldn't have become president, couldn't have become the Republican candidate were it not for the disaster of Iraq and his
true.
American forever wars and foreign entanglements on the ground. What is President Donald J.
Don't want that for that.
saying tonight?
Oh,
saying
yes.
that if necessary, boots will go in and American troops will be deployed on the ground in Venezuela to run the country.
The president does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots
As long as they get oil, they don't mind.
at a very high.
Ah, wait, fuel cell over here.
Afraid of it. We don't mind saying it, but we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain. This is not. This is a very dangerous attack. This is an attack that could have gone very, very badly. Could have gone very badly.
The attack came at about 1 o'clock in the morning, US or Venezuelan time, we should say. And within hours of the capture
Fuel
of
cell,
Maduro and
you
his
waste
wife,
of time.
Flores, Trump was back on Fox News. He actually called into the station to speak to the anchors, and he described in detail where he'd been, because he's, you know, it's New Year's, it's still the holidays. He's at Mar-a-Lago. He's not in the White
Hey, I've
House.
opened a sea vault if you're interested. I haven't gone in there. It's all yours.
It was like watching
Help
a
yourself.
television show. There was speed and there was violence. And I do think that puts you in the sort of
Yeah, it's over here.
mind to understand what this has been for Trump. You know, whether it's kind of Call of
All yours.
Duty, Black Ops 2, whether it's that he feels he's right in the middle of some kind of video game. There isn't a crisis room in Mar-a-Lago. There isn't a control center. He was literally watching it live through the television in a room. I mean, they did the press conference from the tea room just now. And Trump's first response is to call in and say, we did it with speed and violence. And he said there's no other country on earth that could do that maneuver. Well, he's probably right, but it does beg the question, is there another country on earth that would want to do that maneuver, that would think, frankly, it could get away with a maneuver like that? As Lewis was saying, nominally about seizing drugs or stopping drugs cartels, but very clearly about something entirely different, which is seizing back oil reserves, which they believe have been taken from America. He basically laid out in that press conference, along with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, that they feel hard done by with Venezuela's approach to oil. Venezuela has a lot of oil. It's the biggest oil reserves in the world, but it exports very little. And so that essentially is what lies at the heart of this entire military operation overnight.
You know, this brings us to another comparison between the 2003...
You okay there, bro? What are you up to?
Which, as you alluded to just a moment ago, which again, people were saying then, it was all about oil, it was never about...
Careful, there's someone behind there.
Democratizing Iraq so that...
Yeah, watch it.
Could live freely and live in a
It's there for a reason, so careful.
all about oil. If it was, this is much more a black and white case of it all being about oil, despite the indictments about the use of cocaine.
Rated.
But, you know, just one word, if we're comparing
Rated.
this to Iraq, and I think it does make it worth comparing to. You know, the Iraq military operation was also brutally efficient. The way that they got rid of Saddam, who has a very well-equipped army, and the way that they toppled Saddam Hussein was extremely well done. It's what came next that was disastrous. The running of the country, the debathification of the military, all the rest of it.
Yeah, that was it. That's why I was saying when I heard about they'd taken removed the Venezuelan president, my immediate reaction was, is this sounds motherfucking
to be on the ground to maintain public order. How many civil servants will it take to run Venezuela? And these questions, Donald Trump will say, look, we're going to do it thoroughly, we're going to do it very well. This is a massive undertaking that Donald Trump is just
get off me.
America to right now.
And that is, as I say, particularly striking and extraordinary when you consider Trump.
Fucking, I hate these guys.
He has basically undergone a transformation. And I think it was quite a revealing moment, just thinking about his motivations for a minute. I think it was quite a revealing moment in that press conference where he started to cite some of what he considers to be other extremely successful expeditions on a smaller scale that we've seen up to now. Whether it is action he's taken in Iran, violent action he's taken in Iran, whether it is stuff that's done in Gaza, Afghanistan, elsewhere. This is a man, I think, who is increasingly convinced of his own abilities and his own strategic calls, and is, as we discussed on the show before, looking for a legacy. I think it's worth just rewinding a little bit, because I think for a lot of people, although this has been going on for some months now, American military build-up in the southern Caribbean around Venezuela. For a lot of people, for a lot of you, it may well be the case that it comes as a complete surprise. And indeed, there's probably some justification for that, partly because, as we say, it is so unprecedented. Just to go back to exactly what in the past why Trump has got such beef with Maduro. It is true to say that Nicolas Maduro, who has been basically the dictator in Venezuela for some years, he succeeded Hugo Chavez, who is a sort of left-wing, firebrand figure in Venezuela. Historically, the US had good relations with Venezuela in the Cold War. That changed when Chavez came to office. No one should mourn Maduro's removal and his passing as dictator of Venezuela. He was a bad guy, a nasty guy, a dictator, brutal regime, thousands of Venezuelans killed. But it is true to say that Trump in particular has had a fixation with him for some time. As Emily was saying, the sort of the
It's downstairs.
justification for all of this has been about drugs, and it's been about fentanyl, and it's been about cocaine. Saying that basically, and this is the legal basis, a flimsy one which we can discuss, this is the legal basis that they've gone after Maduro. They're basically, in a US court, which wouldn't have jurisdiction in this matter in Venezuela, but in a US court, he's been done for narco trafficking and for having firearms and being part of the drug trade. But that over time, over the last few weeks and months, what the US has been doing is seizing, attacking, almost certainly illegally, ships off the coast of Venezuela. And the rest of the world has sort of responded, certainly the West, European powers, have responded with a bit of a shrug of the shoulders and sort of gone, well, that's Trump's affair. But he has taken this up a notch now by not just bullying and trying to sort of suggest and trying to bully and force Maduro out, but by actually physically removing him from the country, and he is now on his way, presumably, to a New York jail. It is stunning.
Yeah, and our listeners will remember that 2 months or so ago, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded not, drumroll, to Donald Trump, but to the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Machado. Now, this came as, I think, quite a surprise to many who sort of thought that, there are a lot of opposition leaders around the world, but she had really been considered the rightful leader of Venezuela. Maduro, as we know, had basically screwed up the election, clung to power, wouldn't let her in.
How much do I have?
Was not
That's
democratically
nothing.
elected. But again, to put this in context, Donald Trump doesn't normally care about whether dictators, tyrants, are democratically elected or not. He doesn't actually have a problem with undemocratic states or countries. So it is unlikely that he had Maria Machado's best interests at heart when he removed Maduro and his wife. And yet the interesting question is now, does this then go to Maria Machado? Does she become the rightful inheritor? She won the election. Does she take over? Is she waiting in the wings? Now, she has, in the last couple of hours, sent her supporters notes, and she has made very clear that they have to prepare for power. They have to get ready. They have to do whatever it means to prepare for power. Then comes Donald Trump's press conference, where he makes absolutely clear that he is now in charge, that the row of men behind him are now running Venezuela. And when he was asked whether she would be a part of the new government or the sort of new regime or whatever you want to call it, he said, oh, she understands what we have to do. I mean, that is not a ringing endorsement of the opposition leader. And the other thing I just want to mention is where this all came from, because just 2 days ago, Maduro did an interview with a Spanish journalist where he was sitting in a car. It honestly looked like a sort of James Corden carpool karaoke scene where they're both sitting together in the front seat, and the Spanish journalist, whose name is Ignacio Romero, is interviewing Maduro. And Maduro says, look, I understand what Trump wants. He kind of wants to do a deal. He wants to do a deal on oil. He wants to have an agreement on drugs. I get that. I will help. I understand what's coming. So he said on tape to a Spanish journalist that he was expecting some kind of deal to emerge, some kind of plan to emerge. And yet suddenly, in the middle of the night, he's arrested.
What we got?
He's taken away. He's removed from the country. He's kept in custody with his wife, and he's now going to, fight charges of drug trafficking and all the rest of it. And so something doesn't add up here.
Should I just not just throw everything into this?
And the story that Trump is telling, because I don't know whether regime change came from something very fast happening, and I don't know,
Exodus
Marco
module.
Rubio pushing for something more than what Trump was going for, or whether there was some change that happened between that Maduro interview and what happened last night.
Well, according to Rubio, the talks have been going on for some time, and
in America's view, Maduro was mucking around and wasn't taking the conversation seriously, and so that is why they did what they did. Look, the build-up had been intense militarily, but going back to something else you were talking about, Emily, was about, you know, Donald Trump saying the group's behind me, and talking about how they were going to run the country. There was a book ages ago during the Nixon era calling about the imperial presidency. I've never heard anyone sounding so much like an emperor as Donald Trump was this evening when he was being asked about who was going to be running Venezuela.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious.
John, I think you've summed it up perfectly. This was a display of imperial power. America has always wielded, like any great power, enormous power, and sometimes we can get too dewy-eyed about the so-called, you know, rules-based order. The truth is, yeah, to some extent that existed after the Second World War, but the truth is great powers largely have tended to bend the rules and shape the rules
And do what they like.
and do what they like. But, and you made an interesting comparison with the 2003 Iraq War. That also you could construe, and many people did, as an imperial adventure, also potentially about, among other things, about oil and about American commercial interest in the Middle East. It is interesting that the change that has happened in that 20-year interregnum is that even George W. Bush, who was considered obviously extremely hawkish...
Visions. This is the hard one to get. I guess seeds are the thing that makes more sense for this, right? That's what, I guess why that's why you go into the seed vault. Because you need fucking the seeds.
Still, partly because Tony Blair was advising him to, he still went through the process of trying to obtain UN resolution, of saying this was legal because the UN previously had given him authorization to do so. Where's the UN today? There is no even conversation about the UN, right? Or the legal basis for this happening, right? Let's just get this straight. The US has essentially invaded a sovereign nation without United Nations permission or authorization. It has kidnapped a sitting head of state, and it has done so on the basis not of international law, but on the basis of its own national law, which has no jurisdiction. Now, as I say, you can make an argument to say maybe great powers have always behaved in this manner, but never so brazenly, never so openly, and never in such an openly imperial manner as Donald Trump was talking about there, and saying basically they will decide. That's the other comparison with Iraq, is to say Bush was saying we'll have elections in Iraq and the Iraqis will decide who governs them. Trump wasn't saying that. Trump was saying we'll decide basically who governs Venezuela. As long as it's someone to our liking, then it's okay.
But you miss one thing out, which is not only where is the UN, but where is Congress in all of this? Where is this body, the elected body, that is meant to be a check on presidential power, where you're meant to be discussed, you are meant to be consulted over decisions taken by the president on matters of war, and
never underestimate how fucking amazing this gun is when you max it out.
It's pretty close to an act of war when you've amassed an armada off the Caribbean coast of Venezuela to carry this out. And Congress has not been consulted a jot over any of this. So not only is it acting with imperial power, he's acting as though he has absolute power, and that there is no check even within the United States itself.
The question, just to come back to this whole idea of empire, I think is quite important, because Trump was asked in the press conference if he was prepared to do a second wave, and he said yes, and it would be much bigger. And then he was asked about other leaders. He was asked, for example, about Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, who he calls a sort of cocaine trafficker, a cocaine sort of maker. And he said, yeah, he should be watching his ass. And then he talked about Cuba, and he said, well, Cuba's not such a great place. So this is the Monroe Doctrine, sort of, you know, on Viagra, sped up in real time, with Trump basically telling us that anyone who is acting in a way that he or America doesn't like is in for trouble. And if you go back to where Marco Rubio comes to all this from, which is...
As we enter 2026, how much will questions of Crown Indigenous reconciliation, property rights, and the broader funding and policy arrangements between Ottawa and Indigenous peoples loom over the policy and political agenda? I'm grateful to be joined by David Frum for the first episode of In Conversation with David Frum of the Year to answer this important question. David recently published a provocative yet thoughtful essay for The Atlantic entitled Good Intentions Gone Bad, which has set off a big debate about the reconciliation project. We'll spend the next 30 minutes or so discussing it. David, thanks as always for joining me.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, happy
New Year
to
to all the hub community. Thanks for watching us.
Well, David, you didn't take much of a holiday break, did you? In recent days, you published, as I described in the introduction, a provocative yet thoughtful essay about the broad set of issues concerning Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. Before we get into some of the arguments and their possible policy and political implications, I just wanted to start with a basic question. What prompted you to write the essay? Why this essay and why now?
Well, you and I have often talked about, and I've written about, this gathering ideological challenge to the very existence of Canada. I did a lecture more than a year ago at a Canadian Historical Society about this idea that the claim that Canada is a settler colonial society, which of course it is, but that's the source of all of its development and possibility. It's not an insult, it's just a technical description. I published that article in The Atlantic, and you and I have often discussed these challenges to the founding of Canada, the suggestion that it was a great crime, it was a great wrong, it was based on theft and continuing oppression, and ultimately genocide. A motion was passed in the federal parliament unanimously that Canada self-accuses of genocide. So I've been interested in this topic for a long time. We've often talked about it here. In August, British Columbia trial court handed down just an astonishing decision compromising the title of billions of dollars worth of private property in Richmond, BC, with implications for private property throughout British Columbia and indeed all of Canada. I began working on a story about that in the fall and did a lot of research on it. And thank you for suggesting that. I didn't work through the holiday. The lawyers and fact checkers worked through the holiday. The piece was written well in advance. But it came out to start the new year, to summon Canadians, to invite Canadians to think hard about the path that their country is taking.
We're going to have fun over the next 30 minutes digging into your argument and what it means. But before we get started, let me put the opposing case that I think one would make, which is the Cowichan case, though possibly disruptive, should be something that champions of property rights like yourself support, which is to say this is really an issue concerning traditional property rights versus contemporary ones, and champions of property rights ought to support them irrespective of what era they're founded in. Why is that argument not persuasive to you?
It's not persuasive because it converts a metaphor into a title. There is this claim that of course, Canadians broadly recognize that Indigenous people preceded settlement in North America and in Canada. And Canadians have had a broad consensus that Indigenous people should have some continuing right of use to farm and fish, to hunt and fish on lands. What happened in British Columbia was when the province was settled, the province set up land registries. And this was done more than 100 years ago.
Are you for fucking real, dog?
Bestowed on people who bought in good faith. And it's a basic principle of law that when you get a title, no one has to go back rummaging through the scrolls to find out where did the title originate. You do a title search, the title is conveyed, and it is, the legal term is indefeasible, which means it cannot be questioned. So if somebody buys land, being told by the state that the title cannot be questioned, and it's a matter of fundamental good faith on the part of the state. Say, we told you this title can't. It's not that it can't be art. You have a right to it. There can't even be a question. No one can even ask. Once you have title in your name, it is yours indefeasibly. And the state reneged on that.
For fuck's sake.
And it did so on behalf of what is really.
There's always an asshole out there ruining it for everyone else.
To my mind, the original sin of all of Canadian Indigenous law is the conversion that happened over a number of cases of the idea Canada should honor some right of its Indigenous people to use lands that they used before, into this concept of Aboriginal title, which is the concept of title is an English concept that was exported to North America. And when you say that that's what happened before the English got here and the other Europeans got here, when indigenous people thought of the land the way people before the invention of the radio thought of the radio spectrum. It was just not something you owned. They didn't have a concept of ownership of it. These were mobile societies that moved from place to place and often warred with one another over use.
Be careful, bro.
This practice of use was converted as a metaphor, not as any kind of legal concept, into a form of title that was supposed to somehow coexist with other kinds of titles. And so the Supreme Court of Canada set these two railway trains, locomotives, on a collision course. This hazy metaphor of Aboriginal title with the actual fact of English land law that says when you have title and it is conveyed, it is in the...
What the fuck?
Now, David, the Cowichan case has been a catalyst for some of your work on the subject as well as broader debates in Canada. But as you set out in your first answer, in a way, I think you're making the argument it's a symptom of a broader ideology or perspective on how we should think about the Crown's obligations to Indigenous peoples and the role of law and public policy to advance the nature of that relationship. Why don't you unpack that argument for us?
Well, there is an uncomfortable paradox for Canadians of goodwill. Since over the past now decade plus, since 2015,
This motherfucker is after me.
Canada has made a massive investment in Indigenous well-being. $30 billion a year, more than is spent on defense. It rose the figure over the Trudeau years. There was a tripling from, I think, 10 or 11 billion when the Trudeau people came into power to now in excess of $30 billion a year being spent, more than is spent on national defense. Massive transfers of all kinds of rights, of consultation, of actual grants, of enormous amounts of land. And all of this was premised on the idea that you would achieve a kind of moral reconciliation, but also
I'm out. Fuck all y'all.
make people better off. Meanwhile, in fact, those 10 years have seen a catastrophic collapse in the well-being of Indigenous populations. Life expectancy declines, and it's calculated slightly differently from place to place, but especially in Western Canada, about a decade of lost life expectancy for Aboriginal people, almost a decade. Huge increases in overdose deaths. So at some point, what are you people doing? That you have this catastrophic human well-being collapse while bureaucracies and courts are destroying property rights, impeding development, in pursuit of a theory about how to make people better off, and in complete indifference to the actual truth that while this is all happening, people are becoming astonishingly worse off. You know, I'm gonna say if the residential schools were a genocide, which of course is an insulting and even crazy thing to say, and not that things went wrong there, and there are mortality rates and diseases and often neglect and sometimes insufficient food. If the Canada of today is going to self-accuse, what will the Canada of 100 years from now say about the collapse in mortality among Indigenous people between 2015 and 2025 during the years of the Justin Trudeau government, while all this vast amount of money was transferred often to para-government groups who benefited themselves without any regard to the well-being of the people they supposedly spoke for?
Yeah, I would just say in parentheses to that point, the Assembly of First Nations, which is for all intents and purposes a lobby group representing the interests of First Nation chiefs across the country, receives something north of $50 million a year in federal funding for their basic operations. It's kind of the equivalent of the government of Canada paying the Manufacturers and Exporters Association or the Federation of Independent Business or whatever to lobby government for...
But one difference. They would never say to the Federation of Independent Business, oh, by the way, no accounting. No one is ever going to look at how you spent the money. And if our predecessor government fined you for using the money wrongly, we're going to refund those fines because you should never have to account for anybody for all this taxpayer money you get. Because that's been the policy. No enforcement of the Harper government's transparency laws on where does the money go, how is it spent, how much of it is spent on salaries, to whom, for what.
We'll come to that point, David, but I want to stay on the observations you make about the ramp up in federal spending in Indigenous communities across the country, because, of course, it comes in a context. The Harper government, of which I was a part, apologized for Indian residential schools and launched the decade-long Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had problems, no doubt, and made some absurd recommendations at the end of its work, but made some practical ones as well. Focused on inadequate infrastructure, on First Nations reserves, poor quality education, and so on. And so we've seen this ramp up in spending, in part as in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and this effort to try to improve outcomes for Indigenous peoples. Talk a bit about that motivation, and what government might have done differently in the name of trying to improve economic and social outcomes for Indigenous Canadians.
Well, once you call it your body, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you're already in trouble. That language, that phrase was borrowed from post-apartheid South Africa. They set up a commission that had a very specific mandate.
Right.
Which is in the last years of apartheid, there was both a terrorist, along with the legitimate protest movements, there were terrorist movements on the anti-apartheid side, which the government of the day met with often quite brutal repression, some of it clandestine and illegal. And so the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up to find out, first, what happened, who did what terrorist crimes were committed by the anti-apartheid groups, what repression, what non-legal repression was instituted by the government. And it was called reconciliation because the premise of the commission was, we're not going to punish anybody. We want to know what happened. We're not here as a this is not a Nuremberg trial. This is a society facing, there was a lot of wrong committed by a lot of people on different sides. We want to get to the bottom of what our society did to each other so we can move forward, and reconciliation is going to be mutual. There's going to be, at the end of this process of understanding who did what to whom, there'll be some mutual forgiveness and the building of a truly democratic, multiracial society. The Canadian, so you take this concept and apply it to, there's already an embedded insult in the title. But then there's the problem of, there has been very little truth in this. If you're setting up a truth commission, you don't say, all right, you can come to the commission and you can tell whatever story your grandfather told you, and there will be no examination as to whether that story is true. In fact, that whole question of whether this story, the legend you are telling us is true, is insulting and offensive, because the reconciliation part means that truth is actually a very subordinate concern, or even often an imaginary concern. And many of the investigations into specific wrongs, the disappearance of Native women and the residential schools, have been all premised on the idea that, and the claims of mass graves by responding to intentional homicide on residential schools. That it was a fiction commission, not a truth commission. And then the reconciliation, where is that? Because reconciliation implies mutuality. There's been wrong, and at the end of it there will be mutual forgiveness or amnesty, and some desire to go forward together. What Canada has is an infinite cycle of demand, concession. And each concession brings forth new demands. So the reconciliation cycle is kind of a fantasy too. That's not what we have here. And the use of this language is extremely misleading. And I think is inviting what we are about to see, which is a backlash. Because as the demands on Canada have been radicalized, and Cowichan is sort of the culminating point, but there may be more juice in that box. There's going to be resentment, because the idea that you're taking away billions of dollars of property from people without a hearing. Normally, before your property is taken away in a democratic country, you got a hearing, and there's some showing that you did something wrong, or you were convicted of a crime. There's some process. You don't say the idea they say you can't come to court, and entirely without your representation, a court body that has been asked whether you should be represented and has said falsely, well, your rights are in no way at issue, so you don't need to be represented. You take away $1 billion+ worth of property. You think people are going to sit idly for that? They are not. There is going to be a political convulsion as a result.
Let's just stay on the subject of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for a minute, and these broader questions around the.
You can kill them. You just have to run around something before you do it.
I don't.
But taking on two, forget it.
hysteria and excesses in recent years, including, as you say,
Oh, hell yeah.
about mass graves.
You're lucky to be alive, man.
That have proven to be false.
Right, it's coming back for you, so I'd move if I were you.
David, and now I'm speaking particularly amongst.
It's behind you, bro.
That there's an overcorrection in their understanding of that history. That irrespective of whether there were mass graves at Kamloops or other schools across the country, there seems to be pretty solid evidence that, as you say, children died in relatively high numbers at the school. There is evidence of physical and sexual abuse in some cases, and at the foundation of that policy was the use of the state's coercive powers in some instances to take kids from their households. That was the subject that Prime Minister Harper really focused on.
Whoa.
His apology. So, isn't there a risk in your mind that, in responding to the hyperbole and excesses of the of
right
those
underneath,
who are making these claims about genocide and so on, that conservatives are kind of goaded into defending a system that is ultimately indefensible?
Right. Okay.
Sure. That it's always a risk that when the argument gets heated, that all participants in the argument will overstate themselves. And the only answer to that is for people who are conscientious to try to continually reaffirm the truth of the matter. But I don't think at this juncture right now that I'd be saying that the thing I would be worried about is overcorrection. We are still, we haven't yet reversed or limited the Cowich decision. That's still on the books. It's going to be appealed, and it's probably going to make its way to the Supreme Court of Canada. I imagine that the Supreme Court of Canada will ultimately limit the Cowich decision in some way, that it will say, probably remand it for more review and more due process rights for the property holder, some waffle. But I don't think they will set down a resounding answer that title in Canada is safe. Nor do I think that the court is going to back away from its long project to insert Aboriginal title. And as I say, Canada should be able to both recognize rights for Indigenous people and also to care more about the real outcomes of investments in Indigenous well-being without resorting to this metaphor that says that there is title and that validates the claim that Canada is an act of wrongdoing. And I think that's the place where you really need to start.
40 grand. Okay, I'm out.
If we're going to teach history, and that's what these land acknowledgements are supposed to teach us, then we should teach it. To say, look, before European arrival, there were in what is now Canada, which is, of course, there was no border there, but somewhere between 200,000 to 500,000 human beings, probably, north of the 49th parallel, north of the Great Lakes, stretching all the way up to what are now the Canadian Arctic Islands. Some of them, in the eastern part of Canada, some of them were agriculturalists. In the western part of Canada, they were not. Populations were very, very thin, especially on the prairies, because there were no horses, so you couldn't do buffalo hunts. So people were leading a much more hard-scrabble kind of basic existence. All of this was terribly poor, and people were at the mercy of the forces of nature. And the idea that there was some harmonious Eden here, of where people were long settled and people stayed in the same place for hundreds or thousands of years.
True.
And that the act of bringing this part of the world into the modern age was some terrible crime. I think we need to start there and say that's not true. That's not true. Everyone in Canada, including the Indigenous people, very much including the Indigenous people, is better off now than they were before North America was brought into the world system. And anyway, there was no way that was not going to happen. It's just a fantasy. I don't think a lot of us, when we read our history books about the ebb and flow of Ottoman and Safavid empires, think that there was some terrible crime done because at hundreds of years or more ago in the past, political communities shifted across borders. That's just something we say
justice
is for the living, and in our own time, the question we need to ask ourselves is, hey, how are Canada's Indigenous populations doing? Are they completing high school in numbers comparable to the rest of the population? Are they enjoying life expectancies as long? Are they enjoying other forms of material well-being? Is their water clean? Do they have electricity? All of which requires the fruits of wealth produced by an advanced society, which in every case must rest on a firm base basis of private property rights. You cannot run a developed society without a clear and certain system of private property rights. And that's what brings the wealth that takes care of everybody, including indigenous people whose well-being has collapsed under all these measures that we're supposed to help them.
Yeah, to that point, one of my fears about this over-indexation for the
what else can I spend this shit on?
Historical experience of indigenous peoples is it takes our eye off the ball.
I've got that.
Of
I've got
contemporary circumstances
I've got
and
that.
risks condemning another generation of indigenous kids to poorer outcomes than non-indigenous people in Canada. Let me put an idea to you. Someone once said to me, David, and get your reaction. In the 20th century, many different jurisdictions experimented with socialism. They tended to experiment with it in certain geographic areas, either the nation state or subnational jurisdictions or whatever. Canada has been experimenting with socialism for a particular group of Canadians, and the outcomes have been as one would expect. Isn't the fundamental problem the nature of the Crown's relationship to those particularly living on First Nations reserves, and the kind of
Is there anything else I can claim here? How does it work?
programs that
Vader
are
deck.
indifferent to the types of things that we typically think about in economic policy: incentives, market forces, and all the
Holy
rest.
shit, 4%. Ah,
I think that's right. I'm not sure I would call the problem exactly socialism, but I think what I think is just generally true with human nature is a lot of things happen to us that aren't our fault. And a lot of adversity and unhappiness happens because of things that were in some cosmic sense unfair. But what I think social psychologists tell us is that the people who dwell on the unfairness of the things that happen to them become much less efficacious people than those who say, oh, well, that happened, I'm going to get past it. And so I think as we're thinking about how do we improve well-being, that the most great wrong that is being done is not just the material, the concentration of resources and state ownership, but it's also the message to people that anything bad that happens to you is something you can have absolutely no control over. It was done 100 plus years ago. You're just the multi-generational casualty. It's hopeless for you. And you're entitled to be angry about it, but there's no real hope that you'll ever overcome it. But your anger is a political resource for those who have other grievances against the society. I mean, I think the first thing that people need to be better off is pride in themselves, belief in themselves. And maybe that's of all the things that the Canadian system has taken away.
Yes.
You know, one of the paradoxes is the American experience with their indigenous populations is, of course, much more brutal than anything that happened in Canada. There's no, the story of the settled agricultural nations who lived in what is now Georgia and Alabama. I'm going to forget, there are 5 of them. I'm going to forget the names: Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee. And their land was simply, and it was settled agricultural land. And these are populations that had become literate and were publishing newspapers and had constitutions and political institutions, and were copying some of successfully copying from their neighbors, some of the ways their neighbors lived. And the neighbors then simply stole their land and deported them beyond the Mississippi to Oklahoma. There's no Canadian equivalent of that. And yet, despite the much greater or the deliberate hunting down that happened on the plains, where there was a policy of Indian removal that looks pretty genocidal certainly compared to anything that happened in Canada. And yet, there's some evidence, I think, that American Indian populations do better than Canadians do. More likely to complete high school, I think, if I'm right about that. And some of that is pride and efficacy. And that's the thing you have to. That is the worst wrong you can do to people is make them feel like it's just hopeless. Everything that happened to you is someone else's fault. There is nothing you can do.
Yeah, well, so there's certainly an extent to which we have adopted a policy of learned helplessness for several decades, and the consequences are, as you discuss, pretty abysmal. Penultimate question. There's so much to unpack when it comes to the underlying cultural and institutional and policy obstacles to better outcomes. But I don't think we should underestimate the Indian Act and, as you say, the body of jurisprudence that is built up over time in response to Section 35 of the Constitution. The net effect, I must admit, David, at the risk of sounding a bit pessimistic, is these issues feel a bit intractable, which is to say it's hard to think through how you would fundamentally change the paradigm. Do you want to talk about some of those institutional issues and how we ought to be thinking about them?
Well, this is the question that I thought you would start with and that I most dread, which is what do you do? So Canada has worked itself into a box. When the Constitution was, when authority over the Constitution was moved from the British Parliament to the Canadian amending system in 1982, the Constitution included a section that said we recognize Aboriginal rights that exist in 1982. And the question is, what were those? Because those are awfully hazy in 1982. And if you had asked eminent experts, they would have, I think, been a little baffled to describe exactly what the rights of Native populations were as they existed in 1982. So the Constitution affirmed something that no one knew what that something meant. And the courts have then busily invented what that something might mean and have in ever more ambitious ways. One
metaphor, David, just to interrupt for a second, is that that provision in 1982 has been described as an empty box,
right? And
the past 40 years of jurisprudence has effectively filled the box,
right? Well, let's amplify that metaphor and say it's an empty steel box. So once you put the goods in the steel box, it's very hard to get them back out again because you now constitutionalize things that were never intended to be constitutionalized. And this was, look, there's a larger problem here of the relationship between court and parliament.
Yes.
And
there's a question.
This is AI Slock. Can't stand it, but this is actually kind of cool.
Physicist, and really anyone who has ever stood beneath a dark night sky and wondered about our place in the universe. It's a simple question on the surface, almost innocent, and yet the more you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Where is everybody? We call this the Fermi paradox, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked this question over lunch with his colleagues back in 1950. Not during a lecture, not in a published paper, just a
someone's
casual
already been here.
interrupted by a thought that refused to go away. If the universe is so vast, if it's so old, if the conditions for life seem so common, then why does it feel so empty? Fermi was talking about extraterrestrial civilizations, about life beyond Earth, about what we casually refer to as aliens, and the power of his question lies in its brutal simplicity. Look at the numbers. Our galaxy alone contains something like 400 billion stars. We now know that most of those stars
all been ready to shit.
Planetary systems of their own. This isn't speculation anymore, it's observation. The universe itself is 13.8 billion years old.
Hey there, how are you?
Our galaxy has been forming stars for most of that time, which means there have been billions upon billions of opportunities for life to arise, for evolution to experiment, for intelligence to emerge, for civilizations to develop technology on purely statistical grounds. Intelligent life elsewhere seems almost inevitable. And yet, when we look out into the cosmos, when we listen with our most sensitive radio telescopes, when we search for any sign, any whisper of another technological civilization, what do we find? Nothing. No radio signals that can't be explained by natural processes. No evidence of vast engineering projects. No visiting probes. No unmistakable signatures of intelligence. Just silence. An eerie, cosmic silence. And that is the heart of the Fermi paradox. The tension between the overwhelming likelihood that intelligent life should exist elsewhere and the complete absence of any evidence that it does over the decades. Many explanations have been proposed. Maybe life itself is extraordinarily rare. Maybe intelligence is an evolutionary accident that almost never happens. Maybe technological civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before they can spread beyond their home worlds. Some suggest that aliens are deliberately hiding. Others believe they may already be here, but we fail to recognize them. All of these ideas are taken
Let's stay back, let's stay back, let's stay back, let's stay back.
Fields of research are devoted
Yeah, I got
to
it.
exploring that plausibility. But I want to suggest something different, something deeper than most traditional solutions to the Fermi paradox. And it's this: we will never meet aliens. Not because they don't exist, not because they are hiding from us, not because we are too primitive to detect them, but because the universe itself, through its fundamental physical laws and its immense
Easy peasy.
has made
Easy peasy.
encounters between intelligent species on different worlds effectively impossible. We were never meant to meet them. The structure of the universe, the staggering distances involved, the timescales of biological and cosmic evolution, and the absolute limit imposed by the speed of light, together, these factors conspire to keep intelligent species isolated forever, confined to their own worlds, even if the galaxy is teeming with life. This is a strong claim. So let me be very clear about what I am and am not saying. I am not claiming that we are alone in the universe. I am not suggesting that Earth is the only planet with life, or even the only planet with intelligence. In fact, I think it's quite likely that life exists elsewhere. Microbial life may be common, perhaps even within our own solar system, on worlds like Mars, Europa, or Enceladus. As for intelligent life, life capable of building technology and civilizations that may be rare, but in a galaxy of 400 billion stars, even rare events can occur many times. There could be thousands, perhaps millions, of intelligent species in our galaxy alone, each on their own world, each gazing up at their own night sky, each asking the same question: are we alone? What I am claiming is this: those civilizations will never meet. They will never communicate in any meaningful sense. They will never exchange ideas, culture, or understanding. They will remain separated not by hostility, not by ignorance, but by distances and timescales so vast that contact becomes meaningless, even if both sides know the other exists and desperately want to connect. And to understand why, we have to begin with the most obvious barrier of all: distance.
Fucker.
The sheer, incomprehensible vastness of space. Distance. It's such an ordinary word. We use it every day, without thinking the distance to work, the distance between two cities, the distance across an ocean. But when we talk about distance in space, that word quietly breaks down, because the distances between stars are not just large, they are so far beyond human experience that our minds simply refuse to grasp them. When we look up at the night sky, something strange happens. Our brains flatten the universe. The stars appear scattered across a dark dome, like pinpricks of light painted onto a ceiling. They seem almost close together, as if, somehow, they all belong to the same place. But this is an illusion, a profound and deeply misleading illusion. In reality, space has depth, staggering, unimaginable depth, and those stars are separated by distances so vast that even when we know the numbers, they fail to register emotionally. So let me try something. Let me start small. Let me start with distances. You can feel it. The distance from London to New York is about 5,500 kilometers. We can cross it in around 7 hours by plane. It's far, certainly, but it's manageable. It fits comfortably within a human lifetime. Millions of people make that journey every year. Now expand your sense of scale. The distance around the Earth's equator is about 40,000 kilometers. You could, in principle, walk it in roughly a year if you never stopped. Difficult, exhausting, but imaginable. Already, we're at the edge of what our intuition can comfortably handle. Now step a little further. The distance from Earth to the Moon is about 384,000 kilometers. That's roughly 10 times the circumference of our planet. The Apollo astronauts took about 3 days to get there, travelling faster than any humans ever have before or since. And yet, even this distance strains our imagination. If you tried to walk it continuously, it would take you about 10 years. 10 years just to reach the moon. Now let's go further. The distance from Earth to the Sun is about 150 million kilometres. Light itself, moving at 300,000 kilometres per second, takes about 8 minutes to make that journey. A spacecraft travelling at Apollo-era speeds would take roughly 4 months. And if you could walk to the Sun, which, of course, you can't, it would take about 3,400 years of continuous walking by now. These distances no longer feel real. They become abstract. Numbers without intuition. But here is the crucial thing. We still haven't left the solar system. We haven't even come close. The nearest star to our Sun is Proxima Centauri, and it lies about 4.24 light years away. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 year, roughly 9.46 trillion kilometers. That means Proxima Centauri is about 40 trillion kilometers from Earth. If you could somehow walk to Proxima Centauri, it would take you around 900 million years. 900 million years. To put that into perspective, 900 million years ago, the most complex life on Earth consisted of simple multicellular organisms. There were no plants on land, no animals, no fish, no insects, no dinosaurs, no mammals. In the time it would take you to walk to the nearest star, life on Earth evolved from microscopic complexity to conscious beings capable of asking questions about the universe. That is, the scale we're dealing with, and Proxima Centauri is the closest star. Most stars are much, much farther away. In our region of the galaxy, the average distance between stars is about 5 light years. The Milky Way itself is around 100,000 light years across. If an intelligent civilization existed on the opposite side of the galaxy, they would be separated from us by 100,000 years of travel at the speed of light. A number so large that it effectively loses meaning. And this is where something important happens psychologically. When we hear phrases like interstellar travel, our minds instinctively reach for familiar metaphors: ships, journeys, exploration, frontiers. We imagine it as an extension of what humans have always done: crossing oceans, exploring continents, venturing into the unknown. But this analogy quietly fails, because space is not an ocean, and stars are not islands. The distances involved are not just larger, they are categorically different.
Poor bastard, got taken out right there, huh?
That outlast civilizations, species, even entire ecosystems. They stretch beyond the lifespan of languages, cultures, and memories. And once you truly internalize that, not intellectually, but emotionally, you begin to see the problem not as a technological challenge, but as a fundamental mismatch between the universe and the kind of beings we are. At this point, you might be thinking something like this. All right? Walking between stars is obviously absurd, but no one is proposing that. We wouldn't walk, wed, build spacecraft, advanced ones, fast ones, and that sounds reasonable. After all, human history is a story of speed. We learned to ride animals, then to sail, then to fly, then, in less than a single lifetime, to leave our planet entirely. So surely, with enough intelligence and enough time, interstellar travel must eventually become possible. Let's examine that idea carefully, because this is where intuition begins to betray us. the fastest spacecraft ever built by humans is the Parker Solar Probe. At its closest approach to the Sun, it reaches speeds of about 190 kilometers per second. That is astonishingly fast by human standards, more than 500 times the speed of sound. And yet, at that speed, reaching Proxima Centauri would take roughly 6,700 years.
Jesus.
6,700 years. The Voyager 1 spacecraft, which has now left the solar system entirely, is moving at about 17 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. At that speed, reaching Proxima Centauri would take around 75,000 years, assuming it were even heading in that direction, which it isn't. These are real machines built with real technology, powered by real physics. So the obvious question is, can we do better? In principle, yes. Physicists have imagined a range of theoretical propulsion systems. Nuclear pulse propulsion, detonating nuclear explosions behind a spacecraft, could, in theory, push a ship to around 10% the speed of light. Fusion rockets might reach similar velocities. Antimatter propulsion could, on paper, go even faster. There are even serious proposals for laser sail spacecraft, where enormous lasers push a reflective sail to perhaps 20 or 30% of the speed of light. At those speeds, Proxima Centauri could be reached in decades rather than millennia. And none of this violates the laws of physics. So far, so hopeful. But here is where the universe starts to close the door, because speed is not the real problem. Energy is. To accelerate just 1 kilogram of mass to 10% of the speed of light requires about 450 trillion joules of energy. That's roughly the daily energy output of a large power station for 1 kilogram. A spacecraft capable of carrying humans or even sophisticated robots would not weigh kilograms. It would weigh thousands, perhaps millions of kilograms. And the energy required scales brutally. It increases linearly with mass and with the square of velocity. So doubling your speed doesn't double the energy required, it quadruples it. Suddenly, interstellar travel begins to look less like exploration and more like an energy crisis on a cosmic scale. And this assumes perfect efficiency, no waste, no heat loss, no inefficiencies of any kind, which is, of course, impossible. Real propulsion systems are always inefficient. Much of the energy is lost as heat or radiation or exhaust that doesn't contribute perfectly to forward motion. Then there's the problem of propellant. Most propulsion systems require you to carry the material you throw out the back of the spacecraft to push it forward. And here we encounter something known as the tyranny of the rocket equation. To go faster, you need more propellant. But propellant has mass, and that mass itself must be accelerated, which means you need even more propellant. The result is exponential growth, a vicious spiral. To reach truly high speeds using conventional rockets, you would need a spacecraft so massive that the propellant would outweigh the payload by absurd margins. In extreme cases, the spacecraft would need to be comparable in size to a small moon. Some exotic ideas avoid this problem by not carrying propellant at all. Laser sails, for example, are pushed by light from behind, but those ideas introduce new problems. You need lasers of truly unimaginable power. You need precision targeting across interstellar distances. And once you arrive, you face another brutal reality. You can't slow down. The laser is back home. Deceleration requires almost as much energy as acceleration, which means you either need to bring even more propellant, returning us to the rocket equation, or find some way to break using the destiny
Hey there, how are you?
light or magnetic fields. These ideas exist on paper, but none have ever been tested, and all introduce further complexity, mass, and failure modes. And then there is a problem that almost no one thinks about instinctively. Space is not empty. Between the stars lies a thin mist of gas and dust, sparse, yes, but not absent. At everyday speeds, it's harmless. At 10% of the speed of light, it becomes lethal. A grain of dust, no larger than a speck of sand, striking a spacecraft at that speed releases energy comparable to a hand grenade. A particle a millimeter across would release energy equivalent to several tons of TNT. Shielding against this requires mass. Mass requires energy. Energy requires propellant. And once again, the universe tightens the noose. You can imagine solutions, sacrificial shields, magnetic deflection, layers of ice, and engineers do. But every solution adds weight, complexity, and risk. And even if you somehow solve all of this, there is still time. Even at 10% of the speed of light, journeys to nearby stars take decades to more distant stars, centuries to cross significant portions of the galaxy, millennia. During that entire time, your spacecraft must function perfectly. No repairs, no resupply, no rescue. And back home, your civilization must remain stable, patient, and interested, long enough to listen for a signal that may not arrive for generations. How many civilizations maintain political continuity for 100 years, let alone 1,000? And finally, there is one last deeply human problem. Why would they bother? Why would any civilization, no matter how advanced, commit colossal resources, energy, and time to journeys whose outcomes will only be known by distant descendants, if they are known at all? When you add all of this together, something becomes clear. Interstellar travel is not just difficult, it's not just expensive, it is profoundly misaligned with the way civilizations actually function. Even civilizations far more advanced than ours may look at the universe, calculate the energy, the risk, the timescales, and quietly decide it's not worth it. Now, let's be generous. Let's assume something extraordinary. Let's assume that somewhere in the galaxy, a civilization has solved all of the technical problems we've just discussed. They've mastered propulsion. They've learnt how to shield against interstellar dust. They've found ways to generate vast amounts of energy. They can send spacecraft between stars at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Even then, the problem is far from solved, because distance is only half the story. The other half is time. Not physical time alone, but civilizational time, the lifespan of cultures, institutions, priorities, and collective will. Imagine a civilization that decides to explore the galaxy. Even with optimistic assumptions, fast ships, reliable technology, exploring more than a tiny fraction of the Milky Way would take millions of years. Millions. That sounds manageable when we speak in cosmic terms. After all, the galaxy is billions of years old. But for civilizations, millions of years is not a long time. It is an eternity. Human civilization, as we recognize it, is astonishingly young. We've had written language for about 5,000 years. Industrial technology for roughly 250 years. Radio communication, the very thing that makes us detectable, for just over a century. Our entire recorded history is barely a footnote in geological time. Now ask yourself this: what human institution has ever lasted, even 1,000 years, without radical transformation? Empires rise and fall. Languages evolve into unrecognizable forms. Religions fracture, political systems collapse, values
Yeah, this place has
shift,
been raided to fuck.
priorities change. Civilizations are not static entities.
And I can't get
They
out that
are
way
living,
anyway.
unstable processes. So when we imagine a civilization committing to a project that lasts millions of years, a slow, methodical exploration of
we're
the
getting out.
galaxy, we are projecting a level of continuity that has never existed, even on Earth. Not once. Even if the species survives, the civilization will not remain the same. The beings who
Actually, the
launched first
best way to get
probes
out
will not be the ones
is
who receive the results.
down here.
Their descendants may not even understand why the mission began. Or worse, they may simply stop caring. This is the heart of the problem. Intelligent species exist within narrow windows of time, and those windows almost never overlap.
Fuck you.
Life on Earth has existed for about 3.8 billion
Oh,
years.
fuck.
But intelligent, technological life capable of
And you
building
mistime
radios,
it, it fucks you.
telescopes, spacecraft has existed for an almost absurdly tiny fraction of that time. If we're being generous, we might say a few thousand years. Realistically, perhaps only the last 100. That means Earth has been visible to the galaxy, capable of being detected for about 0.00003% of its history. A blink, a whisper, a moment. Now consider another civilization somewhere else in the Milky Way. They too emerge. They too develop technology. They too begin broadcasting signals, intentionally or not. But their window of detectability is just as narrow. For contact to occur, an extraordinary coincidence must happen. Both civilizations must exist at the same time. Both must be in their technological phase simultaneously.
Train.
Both
Fuck it.
must be close enough that signals or probes can cross the distance before either civilization collapses or transforms. The odds
Get on, bro. I'm
are
doing it.
not merely small, they are devastatingly small. Even if two civilizations do overlap in time,
Fuck it, I'm
the
out.
galaxy itself conspires against them. The Milky Way is about 100,000
That was shit. There was like
across. A radio
15 minutes left when I first came in. Everything had already been raided. So I got next to nothing. I mean, I got that and I got that. Fine, but next to nothing.
Not destroyed, necessarily, but changed beyond recognition. Civilizations do not wait patiently across tens of thousands of years for replies. They evolve, they forget, they move on. So when we imagine contact between civilizations, we imagine something like a conversation, a call, a response, an exchange. But in reality, it would be more like finding a fossil, a signal that arrives long after its creators have vanished, a message from a past that no longer exists. And this is why the universe feels so quiet, not because no one is out there, but because everyone exists at the wrong time. Each intelligent species flickers briefly into awareness, looks out into the darkness, sends out a few tentative signals and then fades away long before anyone else has a chance to answer. We are not shouting into an empty universe. We are whispering across an ocean of time, and almost no one is listening, not because they don't want to, but because they are already gone. Now, let's slow this down, because at this point, many people respond with a familiar objection. Yes, space is vast. Yes, civilizations are fragile. But surely the sheer size of the galaxy compensates for that. Surely, with enough stars and enough time, overlap becomes inevitable. It feels reasonable. So let's take that idea seriously. Let's run the numbers carefully and generously. The Milky Way galaxy is about 13 billion years old, but for much of that time, it wasn't capable of supporting life. The early universe lacked heavy elements. There were no rocky planets, no chemistry complex enough to build cells. So let's be optimistic. Let's say that planets capable of supporting life began forming around 9 billion years ago. That gives us roughly 9 billion years during which life could arise somewhere in our galaxy. Now consider how many potentially habitable planets exist. Based on exoplanet discoveries, a reasonable estimate is around 40 billion planets in the Milky Way that could, in principle, support life. Again, optimistic. Now let's stack the assumptions in our favor. Suppose that life arises on 1 in every million of those planets. That is extremely generous, but let's accept it. That gives us 40,000 planets where life begins. Now suppose that intelligent life evolves on 1 in 1,000 of those living worlds. Again, generous. That leaves us with 40 technological civilizations emerging over 9 billion years. No correction. It gives us 40,000 technological civilizations emerging over that time. That sounds like a lot at first, but here is the crucial step. How long does each civilization remain detectable? How long do they use radio? How long do they emit signals we could recognize as artificial? We don't know, but let's be wildly optimistic again. Let's say a typical technological civilization remains detectable for 10,000 years. That is far longer than human history suggests, but well use it. So now we have 40,000 civilizations, each visible for 10,000 years. That gives us a total of 400 million civilization years spread across 9 billion years of galactic history. Now divide 400 million. Divided by 9 billion, you get approximately 0.04, which means that on average, there are less than 1 detectable civilization in the entire galaxy at any given moment. In fact, statistically speaking, there is only 1 detectable civilization every 22 million years. Let that sink in. Even under extremely optimistic assumptions, even when we stack the deck in favor of contact, the galaxy is effectively empty most of the time. And it gets worse, because this assumes civilizations are evenly distributed across space. They are not. The Milky Way is 100,000 light years across. If 2 civilizations do exist at the same time, a rare coincidence, they could easily be separated by tens of thousands of light years. A radio signal traveling at the speed of light would take tens of thousands of years to arrive. By the time it does, the receiving civilization is almost certainly gone. Not destroyed, not annihilated, simply no longer there. Technology abandoned.
Hey there.
Institutions dissolved. Priorities shifted. The signal arrives to an empty sky. So when we imagine civilizations talking to one another across the galaxy, what we're really imagining is something that almost never happens. The windows don't line up. Not in time. Not in space. Each civilization briefly lights up the dark.
Okay, I need bastion parts, so we're going to the loading bay.
Long before anyone else can see it. And from the inside...
Holy shit, what was that?
Each civilization looks out and concludes, quite reasonably, there is no one else. Not because they are alone in the absolute sense, but because the universe does not allow overlap. It is not hostile. It is not cruel. It is simply vast beyond comprehension. And in that vastness, coincidence becomes vanishingly rare. This is the statistical heart of the Fermi paradox. Not mystery, not conspiracy, not failure of imagination, just arithmetic. Cold, relentless, unforgiving. At this point, there's a natural response, a kind of last refuge for optimism, all right? You might say, maybe civilizations like ours are short-lived, maybe human...
Who took you out, bro?
But surely not all intelligent species are.
I've got a
Surely
deep if you
some
need one.
civilizations achieve stability.
Oh, hey. What happened?
We got down by a guy in there, and then I killed that guy, and now this guy's here.
Alright.
Yeah, he flashed his flashlight at me and stuff. I was telling him I was chill. I literally got nothing on me except for, like, this gun.
Alright, fair enough.
Dumbass. But he's dead now. You can go, you know, eBay Explorer if you want.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's gone now. There's no point doing that.
Med bench.
Haley.
That was the guy, huh?
Yeah, this is the guy. Thank you so much.
No worries. Shit. Ready 4,000. Oh, fuck it. I'm gonna go out. Okay. Well, I got some basic guns, so that's fine. But, yeah. I mean, if the Bastion's gone and the mid-lab's been raided by me, all the cool shit's pretty much gone, unless you get real lucky with, like, a blueprint or some shit. I'm not gonna worry about that. Right, we're out.
Longevity, millions of years of technological existence. And if that were true, if technological civilizations routinely lasted millions of years, then everything would change. The numbers would shift dramatically. The windows would widen. Overlap would become likely. So let's consider that possibility seriously. What would a million-year-old technological civilization look like? It wouldn't just be slightly more advanced than us. It wouldn't just have faster computers or better spacecraft. it would be incomprehensibly different. Human technological history spans barely a few hundred years, and in that time we've gone from steam engines to artificial intelligence, from handwritten letters to instant global communication, from horse-drawn carts to machines leaving the solar system. Project that forward, not thousands of years, but millions. Such a civilization would almost certainly no longer be biological in the way we understand it. They might have genetically engineered themselves beyond recognition, or transitioned into artificial substrates entirely, or distributed their cognition across machines, networks, and environments. And here is the key point. A civilization that advanced is unlikely to behave in ways we expect. It might not broadcast radio signals. It might not build massive visible structures. It might not expand aggressively across the galaxy. Because why would it? Radio communication is a crude, leaky technology, something you pass through briefly, not something you rely on forever. A million-year-old civilization may communicate using methods we cannot detect, or perhaps not communicate outward at all.
What is emergence? You could try to say, well, if you knew all about...
You know, there's a question that has captivated the human imagination for as long as we've looked up at the night sky. Could we ever live out there? Not just
all of the military, and they probably said, okay, listen, leave us alone, we're going to go in. Now, in your reporting...
You know, there's a question that has haunted science and philosophy for decades now. A question that doesn't become clearer as we learn more about the universe. It becomes more disturbing.
Let's go and shut down.
A question so simple that a child could ask it, and yet so profound that it still has no satisfying answer. Where is everybody? In 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi asked this question almost casually during a lunchtime conversation. He wasn't writing a paper. He wasn't delivering a lecture. He was just thinking out loud. If the universe is so big, if the galaxy is so
plastic
old,
parts,
if life is not unique to Earth, then where is everyone? That question became known as the Fermi paradox. And the more we learn about the universe, the sharper the paradox becomes, because the Milky Way is ancient, roughly 13 billion years old. That's almost as old as the universe itself. It contains around 400 billion stars.
Hey there.
To exoplanet discoveries over the past few decades, we now know that most of those stars have planets. Planets are not rare. Solar systems are not unusual. They are the norm. And the chemistry for life, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen,
all rated. Great.
To Earth. These elements are forged in stellar cores, scattered across space by exploding stars, recycled again and again over billions of years. The building blocks of life are everywhere. So when you put all this together, something unsettling...
Everything's been rated.
There has been more than enough time
Everything's but Jesus.
for life to arise elsewhere. More than enough time for intelligence to evolve. More than enough time for technological civilizations to appear. In fact, civilizations could have arisen billions of years before we did. And if even a tiny fraction of those civilizations developed advanced technology, if even one decided to explore, to expand, to leave its home system, then the galaxy should be buzzing with activity. We should see vast engineering projects, megastructures harvesting starlight, artificial signals leaking into space, probes, beacons, evidence of intention, and yet we see nothing. No megastructures, no unmistakable radio signals, no visiting spacecraft, no traces of astroengineering, just silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but a deeper, more troubling silence. A silence that persists despite a universe that seems perfectly designed to produce life. So how do we explain this? There are many proposed solutions to the Fermi paradox. Perhaps life is extraordinarily rare. Perhaps intelligence almost never evolves. Perhaps technological civilizations destroy themselves before they spread. Perhaps advanced species choose to hide. Perhaps they're already here, but we don't recognize them. All of these ideas are possible, but I want to argue for something more fundamental, something that doesn't depend on alien psychology, or speculation about motivations, or pessimism about self-destruction. I want to argue that the simplest explanation is this: it's impossible to cross the galaxy. Not difficult, not merely challenging, but genuinely impossible for any biological species, no matter how intelligent, no matter how advanced, no matter how determined. The galaxy is not a place that can be crossed or colonized or comprehensively explored by beings like us, or by any other evolved organisms that might exist elsewhere. The distances are too vast, the timescales too long, the energy requirements too extreme, the environment too hostile. The galaxy is not an ocean waiting to be sailed. It's a desert, a vast, cold, hostile expanse, punctuated by rare oases of habitability, planetary systems where life might arise, each one isolated, each one effectively unreachable from the others. Understanding why this is true doesn't just explain the Fermi paradox. It tells us something profound about our place in the cosmos. So let's begin with the most obvious barrier, the one that underlies almost everything else: distance. The Milky Way galaxy is roughly 100,000 light years in diameter. That's the distance light travels in 100,000 years. Light, the fastest thing in the universe. Nothing with mass can reach that speed. This isn't a technological limitation. It's a fundamental feature of reality. As you accelerate a massive object closer to the speed of light, the energy required increases without bound. Approach light speed, and the required energy approaches infinity. This is not something better engineering can fix. It's built into the structure of space-time itself. So realistic interstellar travel requires speeds far below light speed, maybe 1% of light speed. If you're extraordinarily optimistic, perhaps 10%. At 10% of light speed, a level of propulsion far beyond anything we can currently imagine, crossing the galaxy would take about 1 million years. At 1% of light speed, it would take 10 million years. These are not human timescales. They're not even civilizational timescales. They're geological. 10 million years ago, humans didn't exist. Our hominid ancestors were only just beginning to diverge from other apes. All of recorded human history, agriculture, writing, cities, empires, science, everything we think of as civilization fits into the last 5,000 years. That's 0.05% of 10 million years. The entire existence of Homo sapiens is perhaps 300,000 years. That's only 3% of 10 million years. So when we talk about crossing the galaxy at realistic speeds, we're talking about journeys that last thousands of times longer than the entire existence of our species. Journeys that outlast cultures, languages, technologies, and even species themselves. From the perspective of any biological civilization, such journeys are not just impractical, they are meaningless. And this is only the first barrier. Now, at this point, there's a very natural objection.
The Emperor of Mankind has shaped the galaxy of Warhammer 40k more than any other individual. The Imperium of Man, the dominant force in the galaxy, was a product of his Great Crusade and his Primarch project, and his wider millennia-long program to unify humanity. And without it, humanity would have been doomed to destruction. Right? I mean, that's what the Emperor says, but is that actually true? Did you know Tale of Four Gamers is now over on Arbeiterian's Precinct House? There's a link in the thing below. So, the plans of the Emperor of Mankind are broadly familiar to most 40k fans. During the Age of Strife, when humanity was isolated and at risk of being destroyed by Xenos empires, the Emperor arose on terror and led a galactic unification project, the Great Crusade, which, by diplomacy or by force, brought together the scattered human empires, pooled their military and technological resources, and destroyed the evil Xenos, leaving humanity, even in the wake of the Horus heresy that followed, as the dominant force in the galaxy. And according to the Emperor, this was all necessary. Without him and his plans, humanity would have been picked apart by emerging Xenos empires, or lost to the worship of the dark powers of chaos, playthings for the demons of the warp. Yes, the Great Crusade involved the conquest, subjugation, and genocide of thousands of worlds, and we know that in the end, the Emperor's plans were only semi-successful, leading to the horrific and repressive Imperium of 40k, but it had to be done. It was the best chance available to humanity at the time. At least that's what the Emperor, beloved by all, said. So, is that true? Was the Emperor right? Was the Imperium and its brutal and swift conquest of the galaxy the only way? This is a subject debated a lot online. Not only the morality of doing it, but also the question of, well, was what he said correct? The Great Crusade certainly involved lots of death and destruction.
Hey there, how are you?
There was no democratically elected leader. He was an authoritarian tyrant who insisted every human in the galaxy follow his plans or be killed. The internet is full of fan theories that the Emperor was secretly out for his own gain, or that humanity would have done just fine without the Imperium, or that even if it was the only way, the Emperor was still morally wrong to do the things he did. He was a liar, a hypocrite, a ruthless superweapon who wanted to be God. There's always lots of discussion on that topic. What do the books actually say? Was the Imperium, the one that the Emperor planned for in the 30th millennium, actually the only solution? And to answer that, we first have to go through a brief history of the new man himself and the development of those plans. So I'll launch into this with a little bit of a disclaimer. The history of the Emperor and the formation of his grand plan is a little bit disjointed, and we do not have the whole story. We're told it in fragments spread across more than 100 books, so we need to do a little bit of work to piece it all together. There's no perfect timeline of history here, so I've tried to stitch all those fragments together, hopefully without too much speculation creeping in. The Emperor, as far as we know, was born in around 8000 BC in what is now Anatolia, which is pretty close to where the first human civilizations actually were. There are two possible origins listed. In the first, the Emperor was a Gestalt being. The shaman, the early psychers of humanity, had guided prehistoric humans through the previous millennia, the shaman's spirits, which were very strong because of their psychic power, returning to the warp when they died, and then being reincarnated into a new body soon afterwards, and that way, their accumulated knowledge would build over generations. But the warp had recently become so turbulent, what with all the sentient species existing and, having emotions, that the shaman's souls could no longer reincarnate before they were eaten in the warp by demons. So they all decided that they would die at the same time so they could combine all their spirits into a single new man who would be immortal and powerful enough to resist the warp. And the Emperor was that person, born to apparently normal people in a farming village in the ancient Near East. That's the first version of the story. The second, which may or may not contradict it, briefly hinted at by old person in Mortis, is that the Emperor was simply the first psyker, the first shaman, with nothing known beyond that. He was a perpetual, an immortal human, something hinted as being the next evolutionary step for humanity. Was there anyone who could go up against him? Ol shrugged. There were some, but he was the first. You mean the first psyker? The first witch, the first wizard, sorcerer, shaman, druid? The first. There were others who were different, but none like him, not in the beginning. What changed? He did. He was weaker than he is now, much weaker, but always stronger than anyone else. People change. People stay the same. He was always driven. Always. Early in his life, his father was murdered by his uncle. That wasn't the first murder. Humans have been betraying each other for ages, but it was the first he witnessed, and he took revenge, stopping his uncle's heart. In a flashback shown in Master of Mankind, the Emperor says he considers that this is where his philosophy began. Every village already had leaders. Every family had patriarchs and matriarchs. I speak of kings, givers of law, rulers of cultures, not merely those who give orders, but those whose decisions keep a civilization bound together. This was the night I realized that mankind must be ruled. It couldn't be trusted to thrive without a master. It needed to be guided and shaped, bound by laws, and set to follow the course laid by its wisest minds. So the Emperor comes to believe that humanity needs order, needs law, and rulers who impose law in order to develop civilization, and he goes out into the world and starts doing that stuff. Some of this we know about from misremembered legends from ancient times, and we also know that at some point he does become a powerful ruler. The Perpetual Erda says that many Perpetuals in the early days were some sort of warlord. In the time of the first cities, he was a warlord even then, a king, and he was doing exactly what most of my kind do. He had taken on the stewardship of the human race. He had a greater understanding of the universe than anyone, such was his power. He saw the dangers of the warp, the fragility of humanity, the recurring flaws of our species, credulity, anger, false faith, yearning, everything that was terrible and also wonderful about humanity. When I met him, he'd already begun on his path to shepherd mankind towards a brighter future. At some point, he meets Ol Person, who is the oldest known Perpetual, and with Ol as his war master, he defeats and destroys the Tower of Babel, a great tower raised by sorcerers who had unlocked the entire lexicon of Enuncia, the primordial language of creation. The sorcerers had intended to use that language to raise up humanity, but it turns out that merely knowing Enuncia is dangerous. This will be a theme. Cities turn to ash and salt, predator ideas, words that once you heard them would sink into the brain and kill you if you started to think the wrong things. The Emperor casts down the tower and kills the sorcerers, but he keeps the knowledge for himself, stating that even then he can see the shadow of the future, that humanity would be threatened way more than just from a single tower, and that it would be ridiculous to cast aside a potential tool that could save it. Tools, said the man, weapons, knowledge. We cannot throw aside any of it. You are right, we cannot see the clear path to salvation, but we will be able to. This is a step. There shall be other steps and other paths, and we shall take them in turn as we must. This, though, is the first real step. Come, we're fighting a war the end of which no one else shall see. We cannot turn from the weapons that we have, nor those that Providence provides. A glass to see further, a word to open hearts, a sword to kill unborn gods. The man in the crown nodded, and gestured to the symbol-covered pillars and walls. Take this knowledge, and the fate changes. Leave it, and it unravels. It's a simple choice. But there are no simple choices, said Ol. But there are, said the man. It's just the consequences that are complicated. So the myth of the Tower of Babel dates from about 4200 BC, so this is quite early in the Emperor's life, and we have codes of laws in real history from about 2000 BC, so evidently the Emperor's ideas spread to some degree. In these excerpts, the Emperor already seems to have a level of foresight, psychic precognition, but we also know that in 40k, foresight is not very reliable. You can often see the potential results, but not what decisions you have to make to get there. We also know that he was one other ancient ruler, Alexander the Great, who in 323 BC created the largest empire ever seen at the time, which stretched from Europe all the way to northern India. In a fevered memory, Horus says that the emperor once told him that he was Alexander, who wept when he reached the banks of the Hyphasis, the Beas River, when he found there was no more that he could conquer. Anyway, he came to the river Hyphasis and crossed it and wept, for, as he put it, there were no new worlds to conquer. Beside the Hyphasis, my father wept because at the time he felt he had accomplished all he could. His ambitions were achieved, and the revelation shook him. He was not proud or satisfied, he was bereft. In
So
fact,
keep
the original
mushrooms,
quote from
keep
Plutarch
apricots.
says he wept because he realized there were infinite worlds to conquer, which also makes sense because shortly after this, the Emperor discovered the ancient Xenos device known as the Golden Throne under the sands of Asia, or maybe a device that inspired or became part of the Golden Throne, it's unclear. This also tracks the Golden Throne will eventually be sited under the Himalayas under his palace, which is exactly where Alexander got to when he had his realization. And then in history, Alexander dies and his empire was immediately broken up by his squabbling generals, which does reinforce the Emperor's original argument a bit. The minute he wasn't there to rule, apparently off studying the Golden Throne, the empire fell apart. That's the last we have of the Emperor being an actual ruler. After this, coinciding with the discovery of the Golden Throne, he seems to move into the background, and we're told he's guiding humanity without directly ruling over it for thousands of years. At some point in the Middle Ages, he briefly emerges as a golden knight who defeats a silvery worm-like construct in modern-day Libya and then imprisons it on Mars. This is implied to be a shard of the ancient Catan, the Void Dragon. And this event gives rise to the myth of St. George and the Dragon, where it's confused with the historical St. George, who likely existed a lot earlier. Perceiving that the dragon was helpless, though not dead, the knight untied a long white banner from his shattered lance and bound it around the neck of the monster. With the dragon subdued, the knight turned to the astounded handmaidens and the people of the city who streamed from its gates in a riot of adulation. The knight raised a hand to quiet them, and such was his presence and radiance that all who beheld him fell silent. "The dragon is defeated," cried the warrior, "but it's beyond even my power to destroy."
All right, we are officially live. Hello, everybody. It's Saturday morning. Feels like a Sunday. It has felt like a Sunday for several days now. But we woke up this morning to pretty remarkable news. The United States has carried out an operation, essentially removing Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, capturing them from their home overnight. A large-scale strike on the capital city of Caracas. Venezuelan President Maduro is now en route to New York, where he's facing criminal charges, I believe. I haven't actually read the indictment. A remarkable thing to wake up to, and we want to break it down with our experts. Sarah's going to join us in a little bit, but right now we have General Mark Hertling and Ben Parker. We're going to be taking a quick break when Trump does speak to the nation at 11 a.m. That's when he's supposed to speak. And then we'll continue talking on the other side of the speech for some analysis about what he has to say. But Mark, let's start with you. I mean, what did you've been digesting this for several hours and talking about it on MSN for several hours now too. But what do you make of what happened overnight, and what should people take from the operation?
Well, first I'd start off by saying it was probably pretty prescient that Ben edited a copy of mine that was printed yesterday about regime change and the challenges associated with it. And what I said in that article was primarily that, you know, the military operations are usually very short, and in case when the United States does it, they're very good, and they have been so far this morning. But then it's what comes after that. What I've been watching this morning and been commenting on is the effectiveness and efficiency of the Special Operations Forces. The first piece of film I saw had a couple of Chinook helicopters, which are normally associated with some of the Special Operations Forces, flying very freely across the skyline of Caracas with explosions having occurred in the background before that. The president gets on a couple hours later on the Fox News and says how great the military operations was, and how surprisingly he also said, we had a couple of guys hurt, but I think they're okay, nobody was killed. Well, even that announcement of casualties is pretty significant and is something that's not usually done. But now, during that presidential address on Fox News, before the true address at 11 o'clock that he promised, we also hear when he was asked by one of the hosts, what's going to happen next? And he basically said, well, I'm not sure, we'll see. It's the typical answer of we'll see what comes next. That's pretty troubling, because that's what I addressed in the article I wrote, is what does come next when you're talking about the head of a government being decapitated and brought onto a ship, the Iwo Jima. Don't know what's happening there. Is he being questioned or just being detained until they can get him off there? That has to do with Is he being treated like a prisoner, or is he being treated like a prisoner of war, where he could be interrogated? These are all the things that are coming to mind. But then again, what I think is going to be interesting when the president speaks is what is going to happen next? What kind of State Department actions are we going to see? What comes after the military withdrawals? Venezuela is a huge country, I think it's about 90 million people. It's a pretty large country. It's got a coastline that's 1,700 miles long, or the equivalent of going from Boston to Key West. So you're talking about a really large country with a huge population, and they have not been in very good shape recently. If you've tracked Venezuela over the last couple of years, they are in a little bit of chaos and dysfunction. A lot of immigrants coming out of there to escape the bad economic situations and the government itself. So really, it's what happens after that decapitation occurs that's going to be important to watch. And this is where we as a nation always get in trouble when we conduct something that would be the equivalent of regime change.
Right. Well, let me just pick up on that. And Sarah, welcome to the show. Appreciate you joining. Trump did go on Fox News, as he talked about. He called in to talk about the operation. And to your question of what comes next, he offered a few little chestnuts here and there. So with respect to who will take over in Venezuela, this is his quote: "We can't take a chance of letting someone run it and just take over where Maduro, left off. ... will be involved in it very much." So that, to me, suggests we will be intimately involved with choosing who will run the country, that it's not necessarily going to be purely democratic with a lowercase d. And then there's one other thing that he said, where we were talking about Mexico, and he argued that the cartels are running Mexico. He says, we have to do something. Something's going to have to be done with Mexico. And it will raise the specter to me, and Sarah, pick up when I stop here. Is this going to be something that a playbook that we duplicate for other countries? Already we're seeing senators talk about something similar happening in Colombia. Trump talking openly about Mexico. Are we at this place now where we're just going to start picking off leaders that we don't like in Latin America and saying, you know what, we're going to install people that we do?
Well, Sam, this is where having a coherent foreign policy that is stated is incredibly helpful. The reason you're asking the question is because we sit here without a clear understanding of this administration's foreign policy goals and aims. And in fact, because Trump ran as an entirely different type of person, right? This is the opposite of what he ran on. Now, we don't know, is this a forever war in there? But the idea that we would be intimately involved in regime change, not just in Venezuela, but with people who we're friendlier with, like Mexico, that would be the kind of thing that a normal administration would lay out as a matter of foreign policy. This is what America's aims are. This is why it's good for America. This is what we do. But this is the exact opposite of what Trump told us. And so we've got nothing to go on but Trump's weird call-ins to Fox News.
No.
I mean, not to state the obvious, but that's no way to run a country. It's no way for a world superpower to behave, where we have to sit on the couch with these Fox News hosts to figure out what is America doing?
Ben, when you're like digesting all the news bits around this, there's a bunch of things we just don't know, right? Like, and I think that filling in those blanks, as Sarah's talking about, is going to be critical to just basically having a better understanding, a better opinion, a more founded opinion about this. So what are the things that you're waiting to see in here?
So a lot of the questions we're going to be hearing are very important legal questions about if this is legal under American law, if it's legal under international law, what's the status of Maduro. Those are all really important. But the biggest question here, and Sarah alluded to this, is what problem are we trying to solve here? And, we talked about this a little bit before we got on, whether or not this is regime change. It's hard to say at this point. Certainly Maduro is no longer in charge of Venezuela, right? He's on an American ship on his way to New York. But that doesn't mean the whole regime around him automatically collapses. There are reports that the vice president of Venezuela is currently in Russia. Those are, I think, not confirmed yet, but it could be true.
Russia's denying that, for what it's worth, but yeah.
Oh, then it's definitely true. Okay. You know, this is a regime that was started by Hugo Chavez, and it was able to survive him when he died. Nicolas Maduro took over. So it's not clear that we're actually going to do anything to change the regime in Venezuela beyond just getting this one guy.
Fuck you.
If we are just getting this one guy and lobbing some bombs at Caracas,
Right, fuck that.
does that solve the drug issue? Does that solve the huge, like 8 million people who have fled Venezuela into neighboring countries in the last year? Does that solve the economic problems? Does it help us get the oil or whatever Trump wants us to do? It's the biggest question is, what are our goals here? And Trump has not done the work to bring Congress on board, to bring the American people on board, to support whatever it is going on.
Just a brief program. You know, Trump is running a little late. We'll keep you guys apprised of, well, busy day. Mark, you and I were talking very briefly about the actual.
We're now going to bring in Free Press columnist Neil Ferguson. You all know Neil from our pages, author of Too Many Books to Count.
Why space cities will never be possible?
You know, there's an idea that has lived with us for a very long time, an idea that refuses to fade, no matter how much reality tries to pull us back down to earth. It's an idea that has shaped our dreams, our stories, our sense of destiny for more than a century. The idea of cities in space, not just astronauts passing through, not laboratories or temporary stations, but real cities, vast, rotating habitats, suspended silently above the earth. Places where thousands, perhaps millions of people live entire lives, where children are born, families grow old together, generations come and go, all without ever setting foot on a planet. In these visions, space is no longer a place we visit, it becomes a place we belong. We imagine immense structures, turning slowly against the blackness. Gerard, One-Eels, colossal cylinders, rotating gently to create artificial gravity, their inner surfaces stretching for kilometers, filled with farms, lakes, neighborhoods, entire skylines curving overhead. Stanford Taurus designs enormous wheels in space, with cities built along the inner rim, sunlight streaming in as they spin. Bernal spheres, self-contained worlds. People living on the inside of a hollow globe, the sun carefully guided inward through windows and mirrors. These ideas aren't crude fantasies. They're not just the stuff of novels or films.
This is AI and it's creepy as hell.
Calculated, rooted in physics, mathematics, and engineering. They've been studied seriously.
Diary of a CEO. I forgot. If we don't fix this now, it's not ready. These people are so dramatic.
I'm going to just be honest. There were times where Joe Biden greatly disappointed me. And frankly, you know, angered me. Like on the day of my debate with Trump, the stakes were so high. And the president calls and he said to me, it just was so unnecessary.
And you took something from that?
That his motivation was all about himself.
Do you think he wanted you to win the election?
Oh, shit.
Madam Vice President, there's nothing you said I couldn't ask you.
Because I have a lot to say. And so...
Okay, so do you wish you hadn't ran?
No, but I do regret that we did not have more time.
And then the debate that came before with Biden and Trump, it was a car crash. I mean, this was clearly an individual that was very much struggling.
He didn't want that debate. I could tell something was a little off.
How'd you know?
Well, I could start with this.
And what about not going on Joe Rogan's show?
I definitely regret that we didn't do it, but there was a lot of games being played.
And then on that night when the election hasn't gone your way, what would I have seen if I was a fly on the wall in the room?
I was in a state of shock. Like, I haven't felt anything similar to the emotion I felt that day, other than the grief I felt when my mother died. And I knew what was going to happen to the country. So I had a hard time reconciling that we can't still do something about it, because I grew up in an environment where everyone was fighting for justice and for equality. So I do think about how different it could have been, but sometimes the fight takes a while.
Does that mean you're going to run again? I see messages all the time in the comments section that some of you didn't realize you didn't subscribe. So if you could do me a favor and double check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's the simple, it's the free thing that anybody that watches this show frequently can do to help us here, to keep everything going in this show in the trajectory.
I'm not going to shoot.
So please do double check if you subscribed. And thank you.
I was trying to save him. Damn, bad luck.
Part of our history, and you're on this journey with us, and I appreciate you for that. So yeah, thank you. Madame Vice President, how are you doing?
I'm well.
Hey there.
I'm well. I mean, all things considered.
I'm not going to shoot.
Well. My family is good health, so I start there. But otherwise, you know, it's a troubling time.
What are the full range of emotions? When you said all things considered, what's the full picture there?
Everything from grateful and feeling very blessed to extremely troubled, disappointed, concerned of the state of our country and by extension the world. Like a lot of people who are watching the news and reading the news, there's a state of anxiety. What will happen next? I often have found myself saying to people, it may get worse before it gets better. And so the knowledge of that, perhaps the anticipation of that, I think keeps me and many others on edge.
Do you believe that? Do you believe it could get worse before it gets better?
I think it's very possible. Every day,
does.
because actually during the book tour, I've said it to audiences, and in one city, and then the next day something happens. There's a lot that's very unpredictable about this administration, although there is almost all of it that I did predict.
Now, I know you only had 107 days to potentially intervene in the course of history, but when you see these things playing out that you're referring to, that incite those feelings you have of frustration, a little bit of anxiety, etc., do you feel a sense of like responsibility in a weird way? Because there was a percentage chance of sort of intervening in these things. This is a complex question to ask, but it's...
I do think about how different it could have been. I do think about it in the context of the number of people who are being impacted in such a horrible way. I think of it in terms of the number of people who are existing and living in utter fear right now. Afraid of being attacked or afraid of being targeted with hate. Not much less misinformation. I do, and I know that the race that I ran for President of the United States, the outcome of that election is what has happened, and it would have been different. It would have been very different. I try not to allow myself to think too much this way. I will tell you that, because I, for better and worse, really do like to be centered on the present.
So let's go. I want to understand the set of circumstances that created someone like you, because you're an anomaly. There's a lot of firsts that appear in your career. But if we start at the beginning, what is the context that shapes someone to become such an anomaly in their professional career?
Oh, you beat me to it, damn.
That raised me. My mother arrived from India in the United States.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
19 by herself.
I was hoping to get lucky. You can sometimes get a blueprint in here.
Actually, at that young age, became aligned with the civil rights movement.
Well, depends what you got, I guess.
In Berkeley and Oakland.
I got gas, I'm useless, but you know.
Yeah, I already got that one. But thanks anyway, man. I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, have a good one.
Thanks.
California, met my father, who had been a national scholar in Jamaica.
Right, where are we going?
And here I am. My sister and I were born
all the way over there
in an environment where everyone was fighting for justice and for freedom and for equality. Every message we got was, you are important and you have a duty to figure out how you're going to participate.
I noticed this as I was reading through your story, how service and helping others seems to be so interwoven into your DNA. And even we spoke to Doug. your husband, and he was telling me a story about your first date with him.
Uh-huh. What did he tell you?
Well, apparently you made a remark on that first date that you're here to help people and to serve people. He told me many things. We have many pages of what Doug said. Very fascinating. He said, well, he's very in love with you, by the way.
I'm very in love with my husband, and he's very funny. I hope you got a sense of
He was very nice.
Yeah, well, he and I had such different careers, both as lawyers, right? He went immediately into private practice. I never wanted to be in private practice. It was never about money for me. It was always about people and how could I do the work that was about protecting people and giving people dignity.
Why protecting people?
I think there's a lot that has to do also maybe with birth order. I'm the eldest, and from the age of 2 years old, my mother told me, take care of your sister. Look out for your sister. You've got all kinds of
All the
stuff
pictures,
there.
yeah, I've been through everything.
Yeah, this is my sister Maya.
That's you protecting her.
And that's me protecting her. I grew up also, seeing my mother, who was a 5-foot-tall brown woman with an accent, would be treated. She taught me this, my extended family taught me, but then I also witnessed the importance of making sure that all people, that their dignity is respected and protected. And because I have lived a life to see where that doesn't always happen.
So you decide to focus on law in public practice. You have a phenomenal career from that point onwards. It's really remarkable what you're able to accomplish. And this is, I guess, where the first come in, because from the age of 24 to 51, you rise from Deputy District Attorney to California's Attorney General, becoming the first woman and first black person to hold both roles. And you led major reforms in that time, including securing $25 billion in homeland relief after the 2008 crisis, launching the Back on Track LA rehabilitation program, and making California the first state to mandate body cameras for justice agents, and much more. An incredible career up until that point. That could have been it. You could have bowed out at that point and celebrated.
But there's so much more to be done. There's so much more to be done. I think
Watch it.
One of my strengths and weaknesses is I like to solve problems, but that means that I tend to, once a problem has been addressed, move on to the next one without maybe taking the time to pat myself on the back, because now it's time to move on to the next issue.
During your career, you saw some horrific things. That's the nature of your job. You deal with the darkest parts of reality.
The worst parts of human behavior and nature I've seen. Yeah, you're right.
Give me some context there. What does that mean in reality?
Well, for a while I specialized in child sexual assault, which is about the most horrendous of abuse and crime, which is an adult abusing a child. And those cases were so...
Nice, well done.
For so many reasons. I mean, there's a couple
yeah, I got defib.
in particular where I just...
Oh.
Where the children were so young that they were... they wouldn't be able to testify. One was an elementary school little girl. And, I mean, I remember going into the bathroom of the courthouse and crying because I knew a jury would not have enough to convict. And, it broke my heart. I mean, and I have thought about that little girl, years and years and years later. But those cases, it's the worst of human behavior, which is we as a society should be in the business of protecting children and protecting their vulnerability so that they can thrive. But I've prosecuted homicide cases. I've
yeah, I'm out too.
I've prosecuted fraud cases.
Watch out for the shredder down here.
All of this stress and responsibility. Yep. And I'm not just referring to your time as Attorney General, but even thereafter with running for president and the ups and downs of that, the public feedback,
those shredders have some good stuff, actually.
Responsibility of potentially running the you know, the free world, basically, and becoming the most powerful person on earth, and the ups, the downs, the attacks, the child abuses. How does one learn? Is there a framework you've built? Are there ideas or principles that you've developed to deal with such pressure?
Well, this may sound trite, but I work out every day.
Yeah.
I work out every morning.
I got the moves, guys. I got the moves.
I just find it to be just mind, body, and soul.
Have you changed over time?
Oh, for sure, I've changed over time. The pressure has changed in magnitude. But the pressure that I feel in terms of my sense of personal responsibility has not changed. I put a lot of, I hold myself to a very high standard. And I tend to be a perfectionist, even though I am far from perfect. You know, I mean, even during the 107 days, every night, I would stay awake thinking, what more could I have done with that one day?
24-year-old Kamala Harris, who starts as that sort of, eventually becomes the deputy district attorney. If I sat her there, and you're sat there now as Madam Vice President, what would be the notable differences in personality, mentality, in perspective?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's changed, but she was fearless.
She was fearless?
She was fearless. She didn't hear, no, it can't be done. And whether it was the first case that I had, and I was a young prosecutor, and I was going through the files, and it was a Friday evening, and I realized that the person who had been arrested had young children at home, a woman, and all the courts were shutting down, and I went to the courtroom, and I asked the judge, please take the bench again. She has young children. She can't stay in over the weekend. And the clerk was like, nope, he's gone for the day. He's leaving for the day. And I would not leave. And they called the case, you know? But not hearing no, that has been probably a through line of my life. I don't rest easy with the idea that something is not possible. At least I don't rest easy with it without trying to show that it is possible. And that's probably not changed. I also have started to sit better with the idea that, but you can't change everyone.
And how does that change your approach, knowing that you can't change everybody?
I'm better able to assess a situation to figure out what is the potential there.
Okay, yeah.
And be perhaps a bit more realistic without being, I think, jaded about it. Yeah.
And I guess that's wisdom and experiences.
Yeah, it comes with, I think, a bit of experience.
Which allows you to be more efficient and effective.
And that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because that is how I reconcile it, which is the effort is better placed somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at what point in this journey did you realize that you wanted to be president of the United States? Like, was there a lunch or a dinner you had with Doug? When does that decision get made in your career?
It was when I was in the Senate.
Yeah.
I ran into a friend who came up. Doug and I were at basically a family table in a local restaurant eating, and he said to me, you should run for president. And it had not occurred to me until then. It had not occurred to me to run for president. There are people who are born thinking they're going to be president. There are people who look in the mirror every day and see a president. I was not one of those people. But then the thought, it kind of germinated. And then, of course, being vice president and doing the work of vice president of the United States, I met with over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. I've negotiated very important deals and issues on behalf of the American people. I've spent countless hours, not only in the Oval Office, but the Situation Room and traveling around the world. And so in those 107 days, I was fully aware of not only the importance of the job, but fully aware that I had
Okay, where the hell am I?
the experience and knowledge to be able to do it effectively.
I mean, this is one of the things. I was actually talking to a friend of mine downstairs, Lucy Mangini, who sat out there, and we were talking about this idea of like, does imposter syndrome ever leave you? And imposter syndrome is a bit of a loaded term, but you kind of assume that people in higher places than you are have some like genetic or mental or some gift. They have all the answers, but the higher you climb, with your own continued naivety, you start to suspect that no one really is genetically gifted or like has some superpower that you don't have.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you've experienced that in your career, where the higher you've climbed, you've realized that actually everybody up here is like, I'm like that, like, or I'm at least on their level. Have you had that experience in your career?
Yes, I have. But I've also had the imposter syndrome experience, and that was when I was first elected DA. And I challenged then the incumbent. I started out at 6 points in the polls, which is 6 out of 100. You know, people recently asked me, about polls? Well, you know, if I listened to polls, I would have never run for my first office, and therefore we wouldn't be having this interview probably. And I won, and it was, you know, it was not expected that I would, at least when I jumped in the race. And there I was sitting in the office, and I thought, oh my God, I'm now the elected DA of a major city in the United States. In hindsight, it was, we call it imposter syndrome. To your point, maybe it is a very loaded term, because I think there's nothing wrong with having, and I think there's a lot that is good with having a certain level of humility. And in particular, when the people have vested you with great power, right? To understand it's not about you, right? I think that is part and parcel of what when we call imposter syndrome, or who
We already
has
have
it.
that.
I think often it is because they understand how serious the job is on behalf of others.
Yeah.
And I applaud a bit of humility, honest humility, not feigned humility.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are plenty of people that are, you know,
Hey, how are you?
advocating for the sake of the shtick of it all.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point,
Does that ever
the
go?
higher you go, it does. It does, because the more you're exposed to being, the more you're in the rooms with the people who otherwise feel untouchable, the more you understand that they are not untouchable.
Yeah. It's a polite way of putting it.
The more you understand everyone's got a little dust on them.
Yeah.
And they're not everyone's shiny.
But it's liberating to know that that's the case, because, you know, we all put this ceiling above us.
Yeah.
And we think, no, that's my level, and everyone above that has some gift that I will never be able to attain. So I won't even strive to break that ceiling, because, you know, I don't deserve to be up there.
But and also don't discount the signals that many people are sent that you don't belong there.
Yeah.
And you know, I especially when I'm mentoring people, will often say to them,
Thank you.
don't ever limit yourself based on other people's limited ability to see who you are. That's their limitations, to see who you are in your capacity. Don't impose those limitations on yourself.
Well, I mean, that photo I showed you before we started recording that LeBron posted is a pretty iconic example. I'll put it on the screen, but it just goes to show a couple of the vice presidents that came before you, and frankly, they all look the same. So, one might fall into the trap of thinking that if I don't look like this, then I can't do this job. You know, that's what I think the human mind logically might arrive at that conclusion. It looks for pattern recognition. It might think, if I'm not one of these here, one of these men here,
Take care.
with this suit on and this kind of hair and this age, then that's not a position I can thrive in.
I'll see you and add one.
Okay.
And everyone else thinks that this is the image of who can do the job.
Yeah.
So the added challenge is not only the limitations one puts on themselves, but the limitations one might be met with around other people's perceptions about who can do what.
And have you had that through your career?
Yes.
Is there any particular examples that always sit at the front of your mind where you really, really felt that the room you were in, people were discounting you purely based on appearance or gender or race or anything like that?
I mean, there are times in my career when I walked in the room and...
Are you fucking for real up there?
If they didn't know me. If they didn't know what they were walking into. You know, they were waiting for my boss.
And how did you deal with that? How did you stop that suppressing you? Because it's very easy to feel that and go, and to shrink.
Oh, we got a rat motherfucker here, huh? Look at you, yeah.
Walks into a boardroom, a courtroom, a meeting room. Who looks like yourself.
Jump down, bro. Jump down. Bastion's right there. It's right there. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Oh, look at you.
There are so many people who are not in that room who are so proud of you walking in that room and expect that you will use the voice that you carry. You know, and there are tools that one has to employ when you otherwise are aware that you might be presenting the unfamiliar.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Were you the rat? Were you the rat?
Also would caution is don't walk in that room with the assumption
Were you the rat?
your value will not be recognized, right? And so again, this gets back to my point about we all have to moderate what limitations are we putting on ourselves.
Yeah, bro, I don't know who the rat was, bro, so...
Sent our way.
And when you say tool...
No. Okay.
Shit, I'm still over encumbered? Let's just heal up. You know, and I'm tempted to think, fuck it, let's just get the hell out of here. Oh, anvil. Put that. Nice, okay, now we're good. How much do I have? Motherfucker. Alright, let's get out of here. Enough excitement for one fucking day. Okay.
I think you have some fans here. I'm not sure, but... Hey, you guys, you should be a little louder. Donald Trump's like a couple hundred yards from here.
Yeah, although he may be hard of hearing.
Nice.
You're welcome.
You've got a lot of those, don't you?
A lot of things to say, absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Today I've got a very special interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris. I've known Vice President Harris for a very long time, since she was a prosecutor in San Francisco, and I've watched her career morph and change over time. I have interviewed her a lot, actually, at various times in her career, but it's really important to talk to her now after the election, especially as she discusses what happened in her book, 107 Days. I'm really excited about this one, so keep watching. So, thanks for coming on. We're doing this for my On podcast,
Sure.
and we do have lots to talk about. So you've already been asked every possible question there is about former President Biden and his decision to run for re-election. I don't really care at this point. It's because it's about the past. And by the time we finish here, probably 9 or 10 crazy shit things are going to happen, like in the next... I had told Vice President about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s link between circumcision and autism today. And literally she goes, what? Do your reaction again.
Well, here's the thing, Kara. I mean, in all seriousness, and many of you know my background, and you also know that I am the daughter of a mother who was a scientist. And my mother had 2 goals in her life: to raise my sister Maya and me, and to end breast cancer. And my mother, when we were growing up, used to go to this place that Maya and I only knew as Mommy is going to this place called Bethesda. Because you see, my mother was an advisor at NIH. And she would leave us in the Bay Area to go to NIH to work with scientists who have as their goal to alleviate pain and to uplift the human condition.
I really started covering these companies in the 96 period of time. It was very clear groundbreaking technologies, and the people doing it were very young and very ill-informed.
Kara Swisher, podcaster, author, someone who's been covering tech and Silicon Valley since the early 1990s.
Real serious wealth creates real problems for people. They isolate themselves in their wealth. They didn't have any safety thoughts in their brains. They never felt unsafe, and therefore they created systems that were easily abused and easily gamed, and they didn't care.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is The Michelle Hussein Show. Kara Swisher first started watching startups in California as a journalist many years ago, when the idea that these companies would make any money at all was curious and, frankly, entirely unproven. That head start has meant that she's seen the entire trajectory of how Silicon Valley ended up producing companies that are cornerstones of the US economy today and really important to all of our lives. She has known all the key players from Steve Jobs to the present day, and she's built a reputation for being unafraid of what she says to them. Some of them are probably quite afraid of her, not that they'd ever...
Okay, back.
But she's with us on the Michelle Hussein Show to talk about what she's seeing right now and what she thinks is around the corner. So here is Kara Swisher talking to me.
Yay, well
You've seen
done.
the story of tech companies up close for so long.
Yes.
As a new year begins, tell us, therefore, what is on your mind and the areas or the people that you think we should be watching for the breakthroughs or the big moments of 2026.
Well, for this coming year, I think a lot of focus will be on whether big tech continues its hegemony, especially influence with Donald Trump. Obviously, the midterms are coming up here, and the tech industry
Let's go.
is running wild in the Trump administration, whether it's crypto, whether it's this recent executive order about AI, which will not hold up in court. But they, you know, they've gotten what they wanted, and they've seen a huge run-up in their stock prices because of their
Right,
basically
please be
running the
somewhere
stock
good.
market. So a question of what will happen to valuations.
Yeah, we're at the start.
AI bust, I think
Atrium Medical Research, so we're going.
Echoes to the internet crash, and it happened right after the new year then too, and sort of was a darker winter for tech at that time. So that's one question. The other is IPOs. There's a lot of possible IPOs coming up, whether it's Stripe or OpenAI or SpaceX and things like that, and that could really invigorate the tech system. And where are the valuations of those? But I think probably most people are focusing on whether AI will be a bust, whether it's a bubble.
So you are taking the thought that this could be an AI bubble
Oh, shit.
seriously. You do not think
Sure
that that's
am.
something we should disregard?
No, not at all. Why would you disregard it? You'd be stupid to. These build-outs are enormous, and the question is where's the business behind it and how patient investors are going to be about it. It's not to say that AI isn't important and critical going forward, and it is the industry that is the next iteration or the next Cambrian explosion, but
Close.
they may be ahead of their skis, right? With these too many data centers, too many back and forth deals. Feels a little round trippy in a lot of ways that are holding each other's valuations up. I think NVIDIA has an outsized role here, the way Cisco did, many in the first internet. So you're going to have to wait and see. If companies so far seem to be buying, and I'm not talking about just non-tech companies think AI is important, there might be a point where they're like, maybe we don't need to spend this much on this technology now to get the savings we need.
And is there something circular that's dangerous for the industry, which is that they need the IPOs to get the investment, to get money flowing in, but the IPOs and going public also puts further pressure on them and greater pressure on them to achieve the returns?
Well, they've done plenty well being private, like these valuations, and they're for sale. You can buy and sell stock, on the private market of these things. I mean, I think the most interesting IPO would be the SpaceX IPO, because I think it's $1.5 trillion. It didn't grow that much last year. I think it went from 13 to 15 billion. I think it's correct. So it didn't grow as much as, say, OpenAI did, but right now, not forever, it's going to own space. I think it's got 90% of the rocket launches here, some crazy number. So that's a separate IPO that's different. The only thing is related to Elon Musk, who also has to drag around Twitter and Grok behind him, and Tesla, of course, which even though the stock has managed to stay afloat, the business is disintegrating, at a very rapid pace.
He provided one of my most memorable, if toughest moments of 2025.
Fuck me.
When I had a long conversation with him.
I saw it.
Some of this certainly came up
Yeah,
then.
it's pointless to interview him right now. He's not there. He's there to be a troll. It's pointless. He doesn't say anything of any substance. He just makes things up.
And he avoids it most of the time, right? Other than in a very friendly setting.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to get one bigger point before we pivot more into you, which is that, is there a lack of big enough ideas? I mean, Elon Musk has certainly had them, but overall...
Well done.
You have said recently that, in a way, the industry is below its potential, that people aren't necessarily solving the big problems.
Right, let's set the bomb off. That thing's like the Bastion's going to die any second now.
There's a documentary about health and AI, not just AI, but longevity. And AI plays a big role in terms of drug discovery. I was just at a lab in the University of Pennsylvania, and they're using it for vaccines. The problem is the Trump administration is cutting money to those places, and so they're all going to Canada. So that's who will benefit from this. But I think there's a lot of promise of where it could go, right?
Careful, guys, careful.
Destruction, but job creation too, and all kinds of new and fresh ideas getting forward. The question is it fast enough, or is it more of a slow burn the way electricity was? Electricity can change everything overnight. And the question is, how do we adapt it? And I don't think we have enough imagination to know right now.
Bravo! Well done! Well done!
Covering it in the early 90s, you didn't know there was going to be Uber or Airbnb or, Google didn't exist until almost the turn of the century. So we just don't know where this is going, but it's certainly promising. There's no question about it.
Take me back then to your own relationship with the industry, if you like. I was struck by the words in your book where you characterized it as a meet-cute love story that turned sour. Let's do the love story then. Do you remember sending your first email? Do you remember the first key internet moment you had?
Yeah, when I downloaded a Calvin and Hobbes comic collection on a university server. I was at Duke, and I messed up because at the time you didn't have that much speed, and so
that went quick.
The person who was running it was at me because I clogged it up. But I was like, I downloaded a book, and he was like, so what? I'm like, so what? Everything can be downloaded. I remember thinking everything that can be digitized would be digitized, and then my imagination took off. Like, what else can be digitized? Well, my entire workplace, when I looked around, and there was still paper there. Like, what's paper doing here? Why do we need paper? Why do we need phones on the desks? Why do we need to be at the desks? Why can't we be on the move? And I was a very early user of cell phones. I was a very early user of a lot of this stuff. And some of it was silly. But
actually, I don't need to leave out, do I? Why am I running?
Shifting and changing how we work and live. And so it was really like probably being around when the car or plane was invented, right? Like, wow, like, whoa.
Would I understand you correctly if I say that I think that you loved the products, the technology, the promise of the technology, some of the products, but you weren't convinced by a lot of the people, even early on? I think lots of people you're sitting with when you end up moving to Silicon Valley and they're making these big promises, we're going to change.
Watch it, watch it, watch it.
A lot of them don't.
Right. I think very early on, one of my first articles, when I was at the Washington Post covering AOL, right, because it was in the area, it was a local company. But when I moved to the Journal, where I really started covering these companies in the 96 period of time, this is 1996, kids, it's way the last century.
Nice, well done.
But when I started doing that, it was very clear, one, that these were groundbreaking technologies, and number two, the people doing it were very young and very ill-informed. And so what was striking to me, and one of the first stories I did for the Journal was, I think it was the top 10 lies Silicon Valley people have told me since I got here. And one of them was, we're in this together. The other was, we don't care about money. It's all about community. There are no titles here. It was all a lie. They all were very monarchical. They'd have hoodies, but they'd be like cashmere hoodies. There was always such a disconnect. We don't care about those things. And of course, every one of them ended up with a private plane and a private chef.
Yep.
I mean, look, real serious wealth creates real problems for people. They isolate themselves in their wealth, essentially. And so you could see the warping of them right from the get-go, or as it was starting, because they love to tell lies about things. Most of them were harmless at the time, but later not so harmless.
But you would call them lies, not just hype. You would say they were saying things that were not true.
No, they believed it. They were lying to themselves. I had covered other industries, and no one ever, they had an evangelical bent to them, right? You know, I suspect it was probably like this when you had the founders of Hollywood. You know, they started it, and so they really had a real belief system. The finance guys were just like, we're here to make money. I was like, okay, got it, thank you. Like, essentially, they weren't there to change the world. There was a lot of discussion about changing the world, and it was very religious, almost. It became increasingly religious, and it's not religion like Catholicism, but it kind of is. It was an ethos and a culture that was really, having studied propaganda for years, it felt a lot like that. I did that at Georgetown, like watching propaganda
I'm not shooting anyone.
move. And then when they had the tools of propaganda, which was to weaponize and exploit information, well, then the story changed really quickly.
Who do you mean, Cara, when you say they?
Oh, Zuckerberg. You know, someone who had built a worldwide network of information, and largely on other people's ideas sometimes, although give it to him. He's sort of like Bill Gates in that regard, although Bill Gates became a better person, and I have great hopes for Mark Zuckerberg someday. But, you know, this sort of idea that it's really good that we let people do whatever they want and give them all the information and there's not going to be a problem. It was a naivete and an ignorance of history, of everything else, and a pretend that it wasn't his fault. You know, I'm sorry I made this gun. I didn't know people would get shot by it. Like, it's not my fault people get shot by my guns. I'm like, but they're designed to shoot people. Like, several different interviews showed that, really, that I did with him over the years. He doesn't speak to me now.
I know you had a couple of, like, exchanges with him that were really striking for different reasons. Yeah. I remember the period in 2011 when the Arab Spring happened. I did a documentary called How Facebook Changed the World.
Yeah.
I slightly cringe when I think about the title of that now, because at that time, social media we saw it as benign at that time. It was connecting people who were not being connected in other ways. 2016, the US election, it's a different story by then.
Right.
Which is why I wonder, perhaps it is not all their fault. There is something of the gun argument that the technology was also used in nefarious ways, albeit it obviously always had that potential.
The fault would be our regulators who decided to let them do whatever they wanted. They have a product that has a lot of safety issues around it, and they never wanted to address any of it, and nor did anyone force them to. So you could blame citizens, I guess, if we could have risen up against them, and that just doesn't happen. But our legislators never made a move around privacy. I mean, I used to write about this I did an Internet Bill of Rights. Here's 10 things that will not stop innovation and are important for the safety of consumers. You could have seen this stuff coming. Like, it wasn't like it was that hard to understand propaganda. You know, you could just study Hitler, study Mussolini, study any of the autocrats. There's a playbook that's really quite robust over the many centuries of humanity. So I think that they didn't have any safety thoughts in their brains. They never felt unsafe, and therefore they created systems that were easily abused and easily gamed, and they didn't care. Like, if you designed a car with this many lack of safety features, you know what happened to the car industry. They had to put seatbelts in. They had to put airbags in. That's not to decry the car. Some people don't like cars. I happen to. But, you know, I think it's safer with seatbelts and airbags. And I'm sure the people in the car industry would have preferred not to put that in. It's a big cost. So they just didn't care about the consequences. And I've never seen an industry without any regulation whatsoever and have caused us great harm. That's all. I just compare it to other industries. All those other industries would do the same thing. If pharmaceutical companies are allowed to pollute rivers, they certainly would. They have. There's histories of that. Watch Aaron Brockovich, you know, like, they just do it until they can't.
How do you think you changed in this period of covering the industry? Did you yourself have massive belief at the beginning? Clearly a lot of enthusiasm because you saw the potential.
I love technology.
Did you become cynical along the way as you saw some of these characters? I mean, there were others, weren't there, like Steve Jobs?
He actually thought about safety. He thought about privacy. He thought about, like, he was an adult. So when you said it to him, he didn't act like you had, like, stuck him in an eye with a dry stick. You know, he could have a discussion about it. That's why, I guess it's a low bar, but, you know, every time you say something tough to Mark Zuckerberg. He looks like you killed him. Like, oh, how dare you say this to me, sir? If you study technology history, electricity had plenty of problems with safety. Every single industry has this tension. It's just that they're the richest people on earth with the most expensive companies, and it's going to be very hard to pull them back, especially because they're being facilitated by a president who openly accepts donations. And I'm using that donations is doing a lot of work there. Who was part of the system. They've made $5 billion, the Trumps, in cryptocurrency over the past couple of months. That's pretty good.
When you lived in Silicon Valley, which you did for a long time, and your former wife was at Google, you socialized with the founders?
No.
You were at the same parties?
There were a lot of work parties, yes. They weren't my friends. I mean, maybe one or two became friends, but I can't think of, well, way lower down. But we didn't,
Hey, you okay?
Massage each other's feet or anything. But I knew them really well, and they were accessible, and then they weren't, obviously, a lot of them. Some of them were, some of them weren't. I worked for the Wall Street Journal by this time, so they really wanted to know me because they were building their businesses, and the more they could interact. At the time, the Journal could make, like Walt Mossberg could make or break products, right? If he said, I didn't like this, I did like this. I was under no illusion that they were my friends, though, I have to say, and nor did I want them to be.
He was a legendary columnist who was also a mentor to you, and you worked together.
A partner with me. Right, exactly. So when you think about the change, I just interviewed Sam Harris. The tech guys loved him. I would say he has not changed. They have changed, and he is calling them out now. Like, Sam Harris was all mobbed up with those people. I mean, they liked him. They liked his work. And he just kept saying, what you're doing is incomprehensible and heinous. And then they got mad at him for being normally critical, which is what he was of everything. Same thing with Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens. They couldn't get enough of Sapiens and Yuval Harari. Then he wrote a book that said these information systems are not unlike the propaganda from the Middle Ages that killed a lot of women. And then they're like, what are you talking about? So I don't think Yuval, myself, or Sam have changed. They have changed.
There does seem to be a common thread of being very thin-skinned.
Yes. Well, you got the big one. You got Elon.
But you did think he was different, I think, early
I did,
on.
and he was. Let me say, I feel like that's the one I got wrong, completely wrong. Not completely wrong, no. Because, look, what Tesla did was astonishing. Same thing with SpaceX. He was the earliest person I talked to artificial intelligence. Now, it's been around. Artificial intelligence has been around from the 50s, but he was the first person to talk about the importance and danger of it. First person I talked to about it in Silicon Valley. So until his most recent personal toils, which I think have been well reported, I think he had a vision that was big. And then who knows what happened? The hatefulness, the obsession with trans people, the drug use, everything else just got out of, I don't know. Howard Hughes comes to mind when I think of him.
So let's go more into then politics and the relationship with the president. Is that political expediency? Is it a version of, okay, it doesn't take just a donation now, you've got to show up to the inauguration, you've got to sit round the table while the president talks about you. Is it expediency, the way tech has behaved, or is it a fundamental belief that Trump is good for business?
Both. I would say both. I think they don't mind doing it. They kind of like it because they don't like being insulted by the press. The press is mean to me. Like, when they say mean to me, I'm sort of like, are you 12? Like, I'm asking critical questions, so what? Wake up. Like, I think one of the things is they get to do what they want when they want to do it. They're a little like, I want it now, like from Willy Wonka, if you remember, Veruca Salt. It's like a bunch of Veruca Salt. I want that squirrel right now who tests the nuts or whatever. They just want it now, and they want it, and so they're willing to stand there. Now, a lot of them do think the Biden administration wasn't as pro-tech, and they have some argument to be made, but the reaction is a massive overreaction, right? I didn't get invited to the White House. Oh, really? Like, that was Elon's entire shift to Trump, was I didn't get invited to some stupid car summit that the Biden administration had. I mean, really, he went on and on about that. That's the last bunch of communications we had. I was like, calm the down, dude. Like, what's the deal? But I get it. It was an overreaction. But then they saw someone willing to take their money in a more explicit way, either through cryptocurrency or sweetheart deals. I mean, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs would have died, would never have brought Donald Trump a golden statue, not on any planet Earth that I would know of. He would be happy to talk to him. Steve often engaged with people he didn't like or he had difficulty with, like Rupert Murdoch, and he talked a lot because he was hoping to shift him a little bit in some way. But the idea that you could bring someone a gold statue and then get a tariff break, I mean, they'll do it. I wouldn't do it. Maybe you wouldn't do it, but they'll do it because they think shareholders win overall. And so I'm not surprised by any of it.
How much of what's happening now do you think is about the influence of Peter Thiel, who was in a pro-Trump position for a much longer time?
He always was.
Yeah.
Not even before that. He was conservative for a long time. No shift from him. He's the same.
But is it partly his influence behind the scenes or the people he's helped bring up, like J.D. Vance, for example? Is there a link from that to the roots of the political
Vance is an
connection?
unusual character because he was so anti-Trump. I was in the presence of him where he was insulting Trump so much one time. I said, you know what? He does have some good characteristics. If I'm the one saying, don't be so mean to Trump, you know, it's like something's awry.
What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, when he was working for Steve Case, I think, years ago. He was in tech. You know, he's a different character, who I just don't understand in any way. I mean, I do in some ways, given his background. But I think one of the things that's interesting about them all is that they have become like Peter was always like that. And if you read his old books, it's not unsimilar to what he did in college. He did some.
Get it up, huh?
Very conservative from the get-go. A couple of them were also conservative, I would say. Some of them, I didn't even know what their politics. Mark Andreessen, I had no idea what his politics was. He dabbled wherever his interest was. Some of them are just doing it for expediency. I would say Tim Cook, he doesn't want tariffs, so he'll do what it takes. He'll do the minimum, but he'll do it. Or Sam Altman. I think the problem is when anyone gets in their way and then someone gets out of their way, they like the person who gets out of their way more than they should. And I guess if that's your only value, sure.
You mentioned Sam Altman. I wonder whether you see anything different in the younger generation of tech leaders. I talked to Mustafa Suleyman of Microsoft the other day, who is...
He's really smart.
Smart and resolute about AI needs to serve humans. And does that give you some hope for the future of the industry? Is Sam Altman in the same sort of category?
I don't know, because Sam Altman has also exhibited a lot of stuff that's troubling, like the same stuff, right? And I like Sam personally, and he certainly does respond, but he's going to do anything it takes to make OpenAI win. He's incredibly aggressive. And so, you know, he's in a jam because Google has decided to be Google again and is really coming on hard with Gemini. And OpenAI, what I always say, and I think he hates it every time I say it, but is OpenAI Netscape or Google? Which one? Because that Netscape, which was started by Mark Andreessen and others, really was it until it wasn't, right? Until Microsoft came and mowed them down. And so that may be happening to OpenAI right now, even though it's the most popular by far. These things, you know, the planes are covered with the bodies of tech pioneers.
Isn't it, Kara, because the industry moves towards dominance, right? There was a time when there were so many browsers, and now that is largely Chrome, Google Chrome's market.
There's also the cost now. The cost of starting, you couldn't have started an Uber now. It would have been owned by Google. Jeff Bezos would not have been able to start Amazon today because the cost with the compute power, it's just so money losing. I mean, internet companies used to lose money and then some of them made money, but now they really lose money. Like it's trillions of dollars. It's kind of, you sit there and you're like, whoa, they lost that much every quarter and they're still doing it. And the question is, if you're saying someday we're going to get to California and own California, that's a good thing. So let's spend anything it takes to get there. But only a few of them are going to get there. That's the thing. And then they're going to be so big that we won't be able to control them, which we already can't, actually.
I do have a very clear memory of interviewing Jeff Bezos in 2000 or 2001.
You're right, when he was
They were
friendly.
selling books, they were doing well. And he said, I'm going to make Amazon a portal where you can buy anything on it. And I sort of did a, not visible, but sort of the equivalent of an eye roll, thinking I just can't see that day. Anyway, he knew, I didn't. But the point about dominance, do you think that it's unlikely that there will be a world where there's a market for ChatGPT and Claude and Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot?
No. They do the same thing.
Does only one of those four survive?
Oh, I don't even bother.
They do the same thing. They're not that different. I think what'll be interesting is the LLMs that are specific to industries, right? If you create your own. Like I was just on a portal, I'm working on this medical documentary that a company has of my medical information, which I can't believe I let them have it, but there it is. And it's actually very helpful. It's more helpful than the doctor, and it's accurate because it's based on my information and available scientific information, which is mostly, they're using LLMs that are true. right? They're very selective in terms of the information they download into it. And so once you start using this stuff on a one that works and isn't hallucinating and isn't too solicitous, it's like Google on steroids, right? A really helpful Google.
Which one do you use?
I use ChatGPT, but I try them all. I think Claude is quite good. You sort of start to get in the usage of something like you did with Google, and then you don't go with... At one point, Microsoft's search engine was quite good. I just didn't use it because I used the other one, right? I use Google. So I think you get into a habit, and that's the hope of ChatGPT, is they can stay ahead enough in order to... But it's hard to beat Google at being Google, right? I don't know. It seems like they've got all the cards, including YouTube and some other businesses.
What about spatial intelligence? Is there a lot of focus on large language models, and many of us miss this other dimension? Fei Li was, obviously, she really believes in that.
She's great. I love her. She's amazing. She was one of the early people I talked to about, too, because she was doing ImageNet. But I think a lot of people aren't paying attention to robotics as much. If I had to say one thing I'm going to pay a lot of attention to this year, it's robotics all throughout the world. And the thing is, unfortunately, Elon has hijacked this with his stupid robots, you know, that have to run. Like, you don't want a robot to run. Like, you want a robot to walk the dog, but does it have to look like a human? No, it could be a box. You have to be more creative in how robots are going to enter our lives in ways that are not as if we're on Lost in Space and, you know, warning Will Robbins. That's how our conception is, our popular conception, that it has to look like us. It doesn't. And so I think years ago I went to an Amazon warehouse, and they had just bought a company called Kiva, and I thought, oh wow, they're a logistics company now. They're a robot company, because these little Kiva robots were moving all these things around and putting them in the most unlikely ways, but it was all mathematical, like why there was shampoo next to a book by Sheryl Sandberg next to this. But it knew, I didn't, a human couldn't do it, but it did, and it was so much more efficient, and I thought, oh, you know, they were trying to show me how many people were in their warehouses, and I'm like, you're not going to need any people here. I could see the day of no people. And they're like, no, that's not true. And I'm like, oh, totally. You're going to go for no people, right? That's where you're headed. And so I'm fascinated with robotics and replacing just almost everything.
You mentioned Sheryl Sandberg, which reminded me that you...
Remember her?
Yeah. Well, I wonder how you see her now, because I know that you had conversations with her about, she was obviously one of the few women in tech and really prominent, and she wrote Lean In. And then in Sarah Wynne Williams's recent book, Careless People, there's a very different picture that emerges of how supportive or otherwise the company really was of women having a family. You know, Sarah Wynne Williams is off on long business trips while she's still breastfeeding and being told that the answer to being a working mother is to get a Filipino nanny.
Well, it'll be interesting historically. I had a lot of sympathy for Sheryl, and then I didn't, I guess. As you say, some of that stories in the book weren't exactly right, but I do agree with the careless people idea, is that Sheryl and Mark were careless people, and they didn't seem to care about... They would do this a lot, like, oh, don't worry about it. And I'd be like, I'm worried about Russians and bot farms, and I'm worried about information being cleared up so that we don't understand anything. And I'm worried about propaganda. And they'd be like, oh, don't worry about it. And that was the famous interview I had with Mark, where he said, Holocaust deniers don't mean to lie. It was so striking for that level of ignorance to be at the head of this company. I think Sheryl did go along with him. She went along to get along, right? And I think a lot of people place the blame on her, and I would put it on him more than her. But she was certainly right next to him doing these things, and certainly could have mitigated it, or maybe she couldn't, right? I don't know. I wasn't there, but she certainly could have left and said something, but she didn't. So,
do you think you learned from your time in Silicon Valley in terms of the startup mindset? Because you've had a really successful business of your own.
And still am.
Yeah, early adopter of podcasts, and you've owned that space and events. What did it teach you that you took away?
I think I was probably like that before, because I was always a difficult employee. You know, people would tell me things, and I'd be like, oh, you're such an idiot. You've been in that situation, I'm sure, right? You're such an idiot. Except I started to say it, right? I was like, oh, geez, did that just come out of my mouth to an older white man? Oh, well, too bad. And so I just decided I was better on my own to make or break it for myself. And I actually turned out I had some good business sense of what audience wanted. I also do think I was, as I was early to cell phones or using the internet or using email. I think I was one of the first people at the Washington Post to put an email on my stories because I wanted to hear from readers, which other writers like, why do you want to hear from them? I'm like, I don't know, maybe they're smart or something. But I was willing to do that stuff. And so I had already had a risk profile. That was
How long have I been playing this?
people. And then I think I really did see
3.5 hours.
of media as I started to cover the internet. We had a classified business.
You know what? I'm done. I'm going to call it a night. Okay.
Expensive.
We're going to start streaming.
People were rude.
Okay, so take care.
And it didn't work.
Bye, 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 bye.